Precious.
Rob, we are ready when you are. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the November 6th, 2023 business meeting of the Cincinnati Board of Education. We welcome everyone and request everyone in the audience to silence your cell phones and electronic devices. Just to make sure we have all our bases covered, Treasurer Wagner is joining us remotely tonight. Could we have a motion to designate Mr. Mike Gustin as our Treasurer Pro Tem, please?
So moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Vice President Craig. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Jones. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you and congratulations, Mr. Gustin. Would you call our roll this evening?
Thank you. Ms. Bolton,
Present.
Mr. Craig,
Here.
Ms. Jones,
Here.
Dr. Moffitt,
Here.
Mr. Morosky,
Here.
Mrs. Weinberg,
Here.
President Lindy.
Here. For people who are watching our meeting online and would like to speak at hearing of the public this evening, you may do so by clicking the chat button now. This chat feature will be open for your requests for the next 5 minutes. If you'd like a direct response to any question you might have, please make sure to submit your name, your affiliation, your school community, topic, and your contact information. As we look at our agenda this evening, I'll just very quickly mention the goals and guardrails and board priorities section at the top. One of the governance coaches with whom we work is fond of saying that what happens in the boardroom is reflected in the classroom. And we are trying very hard here to model a focus on students and on student outcomes. And so you'll see the 5 student outcome goals we have set for the next 4 years. You'll also see the series of values commitments we have labeled as guardrails. And you'll also see, particularly if you've been watching our meetings recently, we're trying to spend a meaningful amount of time monitoring whether or not our district is making progress on those student outcome goals while honoring those values. And you'll see some of that this evening. For our board priorities, we selected these a few weeks ago, that in this tail end of the calendar year 2024, we are focused primarily on 3 things as a board. First, continuing to progress monitor and provide accountability for the organization. Second, and by number 1, what we mean by that is what I was describing earlier and checking to see whether or not there's progress happening on those goals while honoring those values. Second, we're working hard to share and reinforce context on our FY25 budget process, which is a big one. And then lastly, we're looking forward at our very next business meeting, the 4th of December, to hear the recommendations from the ad hoc committee, which has been hard at work for some time. In a moment, we're going to move to our superintendent's update, but I understand that the family of Governor Gilligan is here this evening for one of our resolutions. And I was going to ask if there's no objection to our from our board, would they mind if we just move the vote on that one resolution up, take care of that now, and then move back to our regularly scheduled programming? Are there any objections to moving that resolution up? Okay, in that case, is there a resolution? Mr. Morosky, would you like to present this resolution?
Well, and I think we're all going to read a little part of it. I'm proud to bring this out of Policy Committee. If it's all right, President Lindy, I'd like to look at my colleague, Ms. Bolton, because we have talked about this for a few years, and she brought it back up in Policy Committee. If it's all right,
yeah, I appreciate you mentioning. Everybody, actually, our board members should have a nice sheet from our board office where each of us have an opportunity to read a part of this resolution. And so, Ms. Bolton, we will start with you.
It is a great honor. I sit in the Gilligan seat, as a matter of fact, at least the way I understand the history of the elections previously. A resolution to rename Cincinnati Digital Academy after former governor and CPS board member John J. Gilligan. Whereas Honorable John J. Gilligan represented the Cincinnati Public Schools community as a member of Cincinnati City Council from 1953 to 1964, United States Representative for Ohio's 1st Congressional District from 1965 to 1967, Ohio Governor from 1971 to 1975, and member of the Board of Education from 1999 to 2007, and
whereas Governor Gilligan was born in Cincinnati and helped to work in his family's funeral home business before joining the U.S. Navy and serving with distinction in World War II as a destroyer gunnery officer. After the war, Governor Gilligan attended graduate school and taught literature at Xavier University. And whereas on November 4th, 1970, after winning the race for Ohio governor, Governor Gilligan thanked voters for rejecting efforts in his campaign to play upon fear and mistrust, and promised Ohioans to work toward an open society, a compassionate society, and a decent society. And
whereas Governor Gilligan took office at a time of many concerns for Ohio and supported resolutions to those concerns that were often politically unpopular. With school districts around the state closing for lack of funding, Governor Gilligan established Ohio's first income tax. The tax was progressive, with lower income Ohioans paying a lower percentage of their income. Without the additional revenues from the income tax, more school districts and Ohio's social services would have collapsed. And
whereas, in addition to saving public schools, Governor Gilligan improved state treatment programs for drug and alcohol abuse, facilities for treating mental illness, and significantly improved Ohio's transportation services. Governor Gilligan created the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency, responding to significant pollution issues that caused fires on the Cuyahoga River outside of Cleveland. And
whereas Governor Gilligan's bid for re-election was narrowly defeated in 1974, but he continued serving the public as administrator to the U.S. Agency for International Development from 1977 to 1979. Governor Gilligan taught at Notre Dame and led the university's Peace Studies program. He established the Civic Forum at the University of Cincinnati. And
whereas in 1999, at the young age of 78, Governor Gilligan ran and won election to the Board of Education for Cincinnati Public Schools. During his 8 years on the school board, Governor Gilligan helped implement the district's facilities master plan to rebuild or renovate every CPS school. Governor Gilligan supported CPS schools being transformed into community learning centers, to provide health, mental health, and other services to CPS students and families.
Now therefore be it resolved that the Cincinnati Board of Education hereby designate the forthcoming Cincinnati Digital Academy to be known now and hereafter as John J. Gilligan Digital Academy. So we've read our resolution. We do need someone to motion that we accept it, and then we're going to need a second. Is there a motion?
I move.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. There were a lot of other people jumping in. I heard Dr. Moffitt, Mr. Morosky, Ms. Weinberg. So there's a lot of enthusiasm and support for this. Is there any discussion on the resolution? Mr. Gustin, would you call the vote, please?
Bolton,
Aye.
Mr. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Jones,
Yes.
Dr. Moffitt,
yes.
Mr. Morosky,
yes.
Mrs. Weinberg,
Yes.
President Lindy.
Yes. Thank you to the governor's family. Thank you to our board colleagues. Thank you to the staff. Ms. Jones.
If we could take the opportunity to acknowledge a couple people in the audience who were very instrumental in helping us move forward. Remember when Mr. Chip Gerhardt approached us a long time ago, so we thank him for the patience. and also Mr. Tom Conlon, who has also been a strong advocate for the change. So I just wanted to recognize that they were here and congratulate them on being persistent. Stand up.
Thank you very much. So with that, and we have some requests for hearing of the public, which I think we'll bring in our regular hearing of the public if people would like to.
Okay, so did he sign up for hearing the public?
That's
He's wanting
correct.
to speak. I got
That's
you.
correct.
Okay,
Yeah, we
thank you.
will, and we will.
They will call you up for hearing of public.
Yeah. So thank you, and we will return to our regularly scheduled programming with our next on. Maybe we will have them come down. So let's have. We have, I think, two people who came to speak on the resolution for Gilligan. Is that Mr. Conlon?
Conlon and Mr. Fairhorn.
Yeah, we have a brief interlude here. If you'd like to come, and I'm going to ask just our timekeeper to set our 2 minutes, as we do for other members of the hearing of the public. Thank you.
President, board members, I'd like to defer to Chip Gerhardt, who managed Governor John J. Gilligan's 2 campaigns. He served 2 years at the age of 78. So I defer to Chip, who's right behind me somewhere.
Thank you, Tom, and most importantly, thank you, members of the Board of Education. Sorry, I'm on the Board of Elections, and I have a busy day tomorrow. So I'm part of the Gilligan family, and as was stated, we approached the Cincinnati Public School years ago about this concept, and the family is greatly honored that you have done this on behalf of Jack and in his name. As your resolution very concisely outlined, Jack was quite a person. He was a Renaissance man here in the Silver Star in World War II. He was an elected official, but what he was most proud of was being an educator at the kitchen table here at Xavier University, and I know that he is looking down on us right now with a big smile on his face, and happy that his name is being attached to a great program at a great institution like Cincinnati Public Schools. So thank you very much. I've let the family know that this is happening. They're most pleased, and it's a good day for us and the Gilligan family. So we very much appreciate it, and good luck with all the good work that you do here in Cincinnati for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chip. Just on a personal note, Chip's mother, when my father was ill, she had the exact blood type to my father. And about 2 hours after she was eligible to give again, he'd go and donate, and it found its way to my father. So even though we're on opposite sides of the political fence, we are fast friends. And I worked in the campaigns. The Gilligan family, and my father was his attorney and chair of his many campaigns. And Jack was, as Chip mentioned, was an educator all his life. I loved going to his home later in life. He always had a book. It had to do with the future and reading, and he was asking me what I'm reading. So anyway, I noticed 2 things. When he came from Notre Dame, he was working on a peace studies program. And when he was first elected, this board was a little fractured, not the harmony that we see today. And so Governor Gilligan brought in just a sense of calmness and maturity that really did make a difference. And I'll just mention one thing that Eve Bolton and others worked on, I think. When he came up with the concept of the Community Learning Center, he lifted it from a New York school district, and he brought the concept in here. And we had forum meetings of community leaders from private and governmental sectors and social workers conducted over at the University of Cincinnati College of Law. And we brought everybody in, and then I wasn't involved in all of them, but some of them. And then he wanted that published. So he called the company that I was running that later became Knowledge Works, And he'd gotten involved in that. So he said, I want to publish this, will you do it? And the answer is obvious. So I did. And of course, all of the years, he was a guiding beacon to me and to many other people as well. Now, Governor, if you're looking down at me, you're probably saying something like, well, that's good, Tom, but behave yourself. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you everyone for your flexibility with our agenda this evening, and thank you both to Mr. Conlon and Mr. Gerhardt. Thank you, board. The next item we have on our agenda this evening is item D, which is our superintendent's update.
Thank you, President Lindy. For the updates tonight, there are two things I am pleased that I do have in the audience tonight, and hopefully they'll be able to come during public comment. But the Superintendent Student Leadership Council is here tonight for our board meeting. They've been learning a lot about policies and processes and the difference in governance and administration. So I'm going to ask them to stand. We have a pretty good representative group right here, right now. Thank you. You may be seated. Thank you. You may be seated. They do, the council does represent we do have a student representative from each high school in the district, and we have been meeting monthly since probably April, June, one of those dates, and we meet every month, and they've been really instrumental in the work that we're doing, so we appreciate them helping us to elevate student voice. Okay, so our update for tonight, our brief update, is for our fall 2023 survey data, and this is for our climate survey data. As you know, we started a process last year where we began to survey all staff members and all students grades 3 through 12. So this is now our third iteration of that survey. Next slide. Next slide. So as we start with our results with growth comparisons, next slide. Just to review the topics very briefly, student, staff, and family, it lets you see across the board what the areas that we're looking at, from belonging, school fit, teacher relationships, staff leadership relationships, family engagement, so forth and so on. One of the new surveys for this year that all students are now taking, we did have a pilot prior to now. Actually, this would be now the third year. The pilot is around social emotional learning competencies, and the data from those surveys go directly to teachers about their students. So it really gives them a way to address some of those very specific needs that students may have around SEL. Next slide. Just as a reminder, with the size of the survey, what is considered significant depends on the number of respondents. So any area that has 3,500 respondents or more, plus or minus 1% is significant, and at 900, plus or minus 2 is significant. And I share that because in just a moment, we'll be sharing some of the data. The additional details can be found where it does say it does require a login in terms of the finding, but the information that we're looking for today is included in each of the links. Next slide. So our survey participation, as we think across the board about our participation for students was about the same as it was for the fall of last year. The survey did require that students there were 2 parts to the survey, and so the next time that the survey is administered, instead of the students having to do one part and then the second part, it will be one continuous survey. For our staff, we had 3,300 staff members that responded to the survey for the fall, and we did have an increase in our families from the fall, last fall to this fall. Our lessons learned across the board is that our student survey was divided into 2 parts, as I shared, perception and support and environment. So we will have that updated for the next iteration so students don't have to log out, log back in, but it will be one continuous opportunity for them. There were 745 students who took part 1 of the survey and didn't take part 2. So that shows the differences in the numbers. And again, we'll merge those together. The other thing on this slide that is of importance is as we look at overall our fall, the numbers by grade level that participated, we see where we see our differences in the survey by grade level. So while we had an increase on the perception side of the survey, the students didn't complete the second part of it, but it's still a pretty relative in terms of the numbers that we had previously. Next slide. Okay, so now we see our overall participation across the board for our students, staff, and our families, and the breakdown by grade levels. For our I'm sorry, I just lost my spot. So as we think about just one of the changes from the spring, I'm sorry, this is the spring to the fall. So the second part of the survey was done in the spring, and then in the spring, this is the first survey since the spring survey. And for the spring, we saw a decline in the number of students. We shared that information as we shared the last set of data. And one of the lessons learned during that time is that we did the survey before in May, the beginning of May, and that was not the best time for us to do the final survey. You can see that when you look at the numbers in terms of the numbers of students that participated. So for the most part, our seniors were already gone when we were doing that part of the survey. If you see in the spring, we only had 64 seniors that responded to the survey. So we'll continue to take the information in terms of the lessons learned and make sure that this year we're looking at doing the survey at the top of April so that it gives enough time for students to complete the survey. And we also want to make sure that we're not competing with our testing that's happening at the same time. Next slide. All right, so this is where it gets into the meat of what we're talking about in terms of the results. And this is the student survey results. If you will note, there is a hyperlink for each of the sets of survey results. So it does allow you, and I'll only cover one of those, but it does allow you to click the hyperlink so that you can see the full presentation. I think one of the things to share in this particular area is that we had increase across the board. And with the size of the population for the students, anything that is greater than 2, because it didn't go up to 35, I'm sorry, for the students, anything over 35, for everyone, anything over 3,500 plus or minus 1 is significant. And so in this area, we had over 16,000 students that responded. So each of these areas was significant in terms of the increase. If you click just one of them, if you will, and let's do the one under, that's fine, that's fine. Yeah, I'm sorry, if you'll go back, Rob. Thank you. If you'll click under school belonging, 3rd through 6th grade. Okay, so when you go into each of the individual hyperlinks, it shows you specifically the questions that were asked, where we ranked in those questions in terms of the national expectations around that particular area. And it also showed where we did increase. And so in some of the areas in terms of our percentile rank, we always want to be 50% or higher. That's always the goal. But looking at where we started, the fact that we show improvement across the board is really important. One of the ones that I will call out in this area, and this is for our 3rd through 6th grade students, how much students feel that they are valued members of the school community, 62%, and that was up 6% from the spring, from the fall. And then for our school climate, perceptions of overall social and learning climate of the school was up 5%. So we could go through each of them that way, but I did want to share with you that the information is here. And if we scroll down, gives other information on school engagement. If we'll also, the one that we also call out here is school rigorous expectations, and to see an increase for students 3rd through 6th grade that believe how much students feel their teachers hold them to high expectations around effort, understanding, persistence, and performance in class. And we had an increase in this area both for our 3rd through 6th grade students and for our high school students. So I do want to offer a recognition and kudos to our teachers and everyone that's working with our students around that. So if we'll come out. So for each of the areas, of course, if we would go into the hyperlinks just to review the information that's there. But again, overall, this information is significant for us, and it's getting feedback from us as we think about what we're expecting in terms of our student performance and how students are responding to the work that we're doing with them. Next slide. Same for staff. For each of our staff areas, we showed an increase. The one that we have hyperlinked here is on belonging, but for as with the other hyperlinks, if you go to the bottom where it says click here, Once you click there, it gives you the entire report for each of the individual areas. So it does let you review those specific areas in terms of areas that might be areas of overall interest. Again, for belonging for our staff, how much faculty and staff feel they are valued members of the school community. That was an increase from the last survey, which was 4 percentage points up. We continue to see an increase in professional learning, an increase in school climate, an increase in staff relationships, an increase in well-being, and that is from our staff members. And if we'll go to the next. And these call out the 6 topics. As we look at staff leadership relationships showed the greatest interest. The table below shows how teachers and staff responded to each question. And this was the one that showed the greatest interest, the greatest increase overall, staff and leadership relationships. And those questions, of course, how much truth exists between school department leaders and staff? When you face challenges at work, how supportive are your school department leaders? At your school department, how motivating do you find working with the leadership team? How much do your school department leaders care about you as an individual? When challenges arise in your personal life, how understanding are your school department leaders? And how fairly does the school department leadership treat the staff? And to look at each of those areas showing an improvement across the board, that's really positive. And I do offer kudos to our leadership for making sure that we are building and continuing to build those relationships with our team members. Next slide. And then for our families, we saw an increase in each of our areas as well for our families. We do want to call out just a few schools that really went over and beyond in making sure that they were reaching out to the families. Collectively, our goal is as many families as possible. What's pretty much average as we look at surveys like this is about 20% of families generally respond. And so we are still working to get to that overall 20%. But right now, when we look at the largest numbers in terms of the response rates, you see the top 10 schools are listed, with the highest being Roberts Academy at 32% and Leap Academy at 16%. And so all of the other schools did have information across the board as well. And showing an increase in each of the areas from our parents as well. For this area, in order for it to be statistically significant, it would need to be at least 3,500. So anything over 2 points or higher for this area is statistically significant. So we did reach that threshold in terms of the significance of the responses. So now our next steps, yes, next slide. So in terms of our next steps, overall, based on the results, school teams have selected questions to focus on that are aligned to the ABCs. During our upcoming principal meetings, the administrators will dig into the fall data, the results as well, and analyze bright spots and opportunities for growth. At the district level, working with our directors and our ELT members, we have opportunities to be involved in the learning sessions that go along with the partnerships and really giving the directors time to learn more about the platform and how to complete their own one-pager similar to what principals have already done as we look at problem solving around those areas. And for us, in terms of ELT and leadership, to continuing to analyze the response rates, identifying bright spots as well, and areas of opportunity. So I do want to offer kudos to all of our team members, all of our staff, all of our parents, our students for responding and sharing with us the information in terms of climate and culture. So we also see a clear alignment to the strategic plan and the goals and guardrails as we look at each of the individual areas. And as we're coming back to do that share out, those areas are important for us as well. And at this time, I'll stop for any questions that we may have.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Are there questions or comments from board members? Starting with Mrs. Weinberg.
I just have a quick question, Superintendent. Is there a way that we can see all of the schools and the results? So I know that you showcased the top 10 schools. Can we see all of the schools?
They're not listed here, but I can provide the results for the how many participated.
Yes.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Any other comments or questions from board members? Mr. Moraski.
Thank you, President Laney, and thank you, Superintendent. So with the schools that had the most responses, was there something, and maybe you're digging into this and don't know now, which is fine, but if you do, was there something they all had in common that they were doing besides being tenacious to get the responses?
I think that's the main thing that the schools shared with us. So when we started monitoring where the schools were in terms of the response rates, we were able to see, for example, that Roberts was really had a strong response. And so some of the things, so we asked them to share in the middle of the process some of the things that he was doing with other team members. And so he shared it with principals. One of the things that they did, the ones that had the strongest response rates, not only did the information come from the district in terms of pushing the survey information out, but the schools also were making sure that they did that with their school communities. We recommended that they use, because the surveys could be done on a phone, that they use a QR code to share it with families, so that as families are picking up students or they're at events, they could use the QR code to then take the picture of it and go ahead and complete the survey. Several of them did that. The other thing is they gave incentives to students for encouraging them to complete the survey as well. So the surveys are anonymous. We don't know which families completed them. So it was a bit of an honor system for schools that did that, but they encouraged them to do it that way as well. And the fourth is if they had events at the school during the period of the survey, they did it during the event as well. So if they were having an open house or a meeting or where parents were coming in, some of them actually scheduled meetings around that time, but they would have them do the survey as just a part of that meeting.
It's encouraging because just what you said sounds like some of those are replicable, right? Fairly easily. So thank you. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Other comments or questions from board members? Ms. Bolton?
Yeah, just on that slide that shows those top schools.
If you'll go back, Rob, please. Thank you.
I think one of the things that I find particularly interesting is that in many ways it captures any number of the different kinds of schools that we have. And I'm also pleased to see too, let's say Roberts and Leap particularly, and there are a couple others there as well, where you have a significant number of English language learners in those families. And I think that's really critical. And again, you have representation of a neighborhood school, you have representation of a magnet, you have representation of a kind of exclusive entrance. So I like that it's so representative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Other comments from board members? Dr. Moffitt?
So I'm in grade 7 under support and environment. And I just, under school climate, I'm sorry.
School climate. Okay.
Just that particularly around some of the things that have happened with regard to our community, that this one brings me pause because our kids, we have work to do with them feeling valued at that junior high school level. But I want to clarify so that I understand the orange in the first level. Can you explain what that means? I know what it means, but I want the community to know what that means.
Sure. So if you'll stop right there, Rob, please. Thank you. So this is one of the values of the Panorama survey is that it's a survey that compares us nationally to other schools that are like ours, other schools that are similar, but it's a national repository of information in terms of comparison. So based on that, it's then broken down into percentiles to determine whether you are at the 50th percentile or higher, and how you rank with others nationally on that question. So for example, school belonging, the one that was called out specifically, is how much students feel that they are valued members of the school community. For our students from the last survey, there was an increase of 3%. However, we're still in the first quartile when it comes to that. So when we think about that, for first quintile, when it comes to that. So when we think about it, there's a lot of work to be done in that space for students that are similar to our students from nationally normed information. If we go further down in the survey as well, it also gives you the specific questions that go, if we'll keep going down, just keep scrolling down. It gives the specific questions for that particular area as well. So if we go down to, if you go down to the question that says school, was it climate, Board Member Moffitt?
I'm not, well, I'm just looking at page 5. Like if we go back go back up, Rob, to the first question, one under school belonging. I know that that's a change, but I think that for me, just looking at data, I'm so curious, up a little bit. Well, I guess this.
If you go down to where it says school belonging, because that way we can call out specifically what the questions are that go along with that.
I think I'm on page 5 of 14.
Page 5 of 14 is where Board Member Moffitt is.
But
Right there.
I just want us to also look at what schools, and I'm very interested in the data, but I want to look at what schools where kids are feeling low, because 37% is very, very low, but our kids are going through so many different things as evidenced this past weekend. So this is very helpful, but when you see the change of 3, that could be a little misleading in that it is up, but it's still very, very low. So I'm just very curious to see what things we're putting in place to help that, and then also what schools those are very, very low, that we could maybe either put some extra supports there or identify what supports are there and reactivate them if needed. But I'm very interested. Thank you for the data. At least it's a foundation that we can start at, and it gives us an opportunity to look and see where we need the most support for our students, particularly in this area around belonging, in light of what's been going on in our community.
Thank you. So I think one thing to call out in this area is what the questions are that students are actually responding to. I agree collectively that this is an area of focus, and anywhere that we're not at least 50% or higher, it should be an area for us to focus on. But the questions specifically, Rob, I'm going to read through them, so if you'll scroll with me. The first question is, how connected do you feel to the adults at your school? How well do people at your school understand you as a person? How much do you matter to others at this school? How much respect do students in your school show you? Overall, how much do you feel like you belong at your school? So when we dig into specifically what the questions are, it really is asking students very pointed information, very pointed questions about how they feel about their school environment. One of the things that we do with principals, and at the next principals meeting, principals received access to this at the same time that I did. So some of them have already started unpacking their data, but this is an area to look at across the board, because we also know, to your point, Dr. Moffitt, that the more students feel valued and they feel like they belong and they feel that they're in a place that they're connected to, the more comfortable they are to do well. And so it's an area for us to continue to look at.
So if we could have it by school, that'd be great. If it's possible to even identify it or to disaggregate it that way, like what schools had lowest scores, what schools had higher ones for the junior high, that'd be great.
So that I'll make sure that I have the question that you're asking for. So you want this question on belonging for the junior high school students?
No, I think, was it that we could see all of the data, the data, but this was just the presentation for it? I may have misunderstood.
No, you have all of the responses to, you have all of the question responses, but you don't have the individual school data.
Okay, so that was what I was looking for, the individuals. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Thank you, Superintendent. Anybody else? Happy to share here last, just kidding. Vice President Craig.
I'll be brief because I know we have some wonderful folks in the audience today to speak, but I just wanted to raise attention to the fact that while we do see an increase in number of people who've responded from the student end, I guess maybe a question that might play out. I know Mr. Morosky was tackling a little bit of this, of what practices some schools have done to get better results. But is there some aspects also that the more regular the class experience is, the more regular, like they've been back in school, they've been doing this year after year, that they've had these relationships they built up, the more we would expect some of the results and some of the number of students who completed to increase? Because I think, it's one thing to survey the students every year, but to a certain extent, some of this is still catching the residual of folks just meeting each other, just learning about each other again, just building those relationships up in a way that they hadn't really done pre-COVID. And so I'm just wondering your thoughts on that aspect of it.
So I think it's a combination, but I do think it's important. We don't know how to begin to address the concerns if we don't have a way to pinpoint what they are. And last year, we started in December by doing the survey for everyone, and that included all staff as well. I think for staff, they needed to go through a cycle of that and recognize that it truly was anonymous for them to really give some additional feedback in terms of that. So we saw some changes as we looked at it in the spring. And then to see that increase in improvement for staff members, I think that that's really important. To the point about the students, I think it's one that we dig into to determine. I would like to think that when you look at the questions, when you really look at the individual questions that are answered or asked outside of directly about how they feel about their teachers. At this point, when they do this survey, they did the survey about 2 to 3 weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago. That's almost that's 2/3 of the way into the first quarter. So by that time, you've been in school for a period of time that you're beginning to move through the get to know you stages. You're beginning to build relationships with students and with your peers and with your teachers. And so it gives students a really good place to respond from. I think the best way for schools to use that information is to look at, yes, where does it compare fall to fall, but also where does it compare spring to fall, because what changed within that transition, and then what have they really done, really problem solving around to say this is an area of true concern for us as a school environment that we really want to focus on.
Yeah, and I think that spring to fall is one that would be interesting to see next cycle around, because I do think there's some aspects of students who change schools over that summer, but a lot of it should be increasing the culture, building the culture, strengthening the culture, and if we're doing things at work, we should start to see some increases there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Craig. Mrs. Weinberg, I have not gone yet, so I'm going to go and then I will come back to you.
That's fine.
I promise. So I think this is a very, very helpful. Superintendent, I wanted to say thank you. I think for people who have been around 3-4 years or longer, it is hard to describe the difference between where we are today and where we were in terms of the quality of the data that we have on student experience, family experience, and staff experience. When I joined the board, we did have a parent survey that we did. I think we did it once a year. I think it was not as robust as what's presented here, and it didn't have any ability, I think, to benchmark our results against our past performance and against other districts nationally. And I think that particularly in leading a system that is this large, with that many stakeholders, with people who have very strong opinions about what happens in our schools and in our school buildings, it is really difficult to distinguish signal from noise. And so one of the things I think is so powerful and so important about this is we had how many, over 10,000 people take, if you put the students and the teachers and the...
Oh, well over that. We had about 16,000 students, over about 3,500 staff members,
So
about 3,000 families.
Yeah, and so creating no system is going to be perfect, but to create some rigor and intentionality around how do we figure out what the majority of families and staff and students are experiencing, I think this is really powerful. I also just wanted to note, I mean, the superintendent kind of moved through this quickly. On the student survey, increases in every single topic. On the staff survey, increases in every single topic. On the family survey, increases in every single topic. And again, I know enough about our leadership and our board that nobody's done, and we want to see all of this above the 50th percentile, and there's a lot more that we want to do. But you know, this work is also full of challenges, and I think it's worth taking a minute to note some things that are improving. And then the last thing I wanted to note is just, it is really powerful to have this national benchmarking. I was trying to look this up, but 3.5 million students have taken this survey across the country. And so I think the standard we want to have, I'll just speak for myself, the standard I want to have for kids in CPS is that this is the best education in the country. So why shouldn't we be able to compare their experience to kids all over the country and 3.5 million of them? And so again, there's a lot of work to do. I know nobody is satisfied with where we are. But this is so different from the systems we had when I joined the board, and I wanted to note that and share some appreciation for that. Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes, I'll be quick with my question. Very good information. Superintendent, you mentioned the word anonymous. And I am just curious, how does it, I guess with the survey, how does it work? Because I know as a parent, I got constant reminders that I did not fill it out. but I'm thankful for the reminders because I was able to fill it out. So my question is how did they know that I didn't fill it out?
Right. So we share this, and we shared it in the information that we sent out initially when it happened. So this is done through an outside third-party vendor. So no information comes to us. There is an algorithm that they use behind the IP work that identifies who those individuals are, but it doesn't come to the district at all. What is not anonymous is the SEL portion for students. That goes back directly to the teachers because those questions are specific to needs for the classroom as we think around social emotional learning. And so that's why I made the point earlier for teachers. We shared it with our CFT leads when we started doing the survey, but I do think it took a cycle for everyone to really acknowledge that, yes, it truly is anonymous, i.e., we don't know specifically who said what in the survey, which is unlike what the purpose was for the Gallup survey that some people did earlier, because it was connected to a name.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Okay, if that is all, thank you very much, Superintendent. I recognize we do have some great folks we want to hear from in just a moment. We'll move to the hearing of the public portion of our board meeting this evening. Each speaker will have 2 minutes and will direct all comments to the presiding officer. If you're online, once a request to speak has been granted, you'll be invited to enter. You should click on the camera icon to go interactive. Provide your name, your affiliation to the district, your school community, your topic, and your contact information if you'd like a direct response to any questions you might have. This request is consistent with board protocol, and we appreciate your help. In the unusual event that someone is not willing to follow this protocol, we reserve the right to end that person's time. Again, each person will have 2 minutes to speak. When the timer goes off, your time is up. Please refrain from discussing any personnel items. After speaking, if you're online, you will briefly see the welcome screen again as you transition back to the live stream meeting. Finally, we ask that your public commentary be respectful of all listeners. Thank you. Mr. Hoying, could you tell us how many speakers we have online this evening? We have 2 online speakers. Great. So I want to make sure we do this right. I have some special instructions, I think, for our first group of speakers. What I'm going to start by doing is calling the names of some students from the Student Leadership Council, and if they could all come down. I have Kamaya Mundi, and I apologize if I'm saying anyone's name incorrectly. This looks like it might be a Sheila Siarayam, and again, I apologize if I'm getting this wrong. And then a Toyan, maybe Embry. And if you'd like to come on down. My understanding from our board staff is that this group would collectively like 2 minutes. You can have longer than that, but I want to make sure I'm doing what you're asking for. That's right? Okay. Come on up, everybody. Thank you very much.
Good evening, members of the board, and thank you for allowing us to speak at today's meeting. My name is Kamaya Monday, and I'm an 11th grade student from Walnut Hills High School, and I serve on the Superintendent's Student Leadership Council. As students, we are directly impacted by many district policies, which is why I believe it is important that we have a voice in shaping those decisions. It's been exciting and rewarding to see how the input we've provided earlier this year has already been considered and put into action as seen through updates in the Student Code of Conduct and restorative discipline practices. As a representative on my school's DEI Council, I'm passionate about ensuring equity in education for students across the district and hope that throughout my term, I can continue to offer input on how the district can foster this shared goal.
Hi, my name is Shalea Siakum. I'm in 10th grade. I go to Dater High School, and I'm very interested in this council so I can have a voice from my school. And what I hope to get out of this council is to make a change in CPS as a whole.
I'm Toya Emery. I'm sorry. This social anxiety get real.
You're doing great.
But I am Toya Emery from Taft High School. I am in the 11th grade, and what I hope to gain from this is what I hope to do for my school is be the voice, because at at such a crazy school like that, it's a lot of kids that can't really speak up for themselves because they got so much holding them back from like their past and stuff like that. And I just want to, you know, talk for them, have a voice for the school, stuff like that. What I hope to gain out of being here with this lovely lady is being a better leader, helping my community get better, and just trying to be a better person overall.
Thank you. Y'all should keep going. I think we have two more. That's it. Okay, for support. Great. Well, thank you very much for being here with us this evening. What we'll do now, I'm going to read three names, and if all three people can come down to the podium, we'll go one after the next. And between our speakers, I'll read who will be the next third person to come down. That way we can keep moving. We'll do our in-person folks first, followed by our online folks. So our first three here, we have Pamela Adams, Tracy Linville, and Ashley Garland. If those three folks could come down. And Pamela can start whenever she's ready.
Hello, everyone. I am Pamela J. Adams. I'm also the president of North Fairmount Community Council. Leap Academy is my school. Right now, presently, I'm working at Ethel Teller in the dining room. My request is what I wanted y'all to look at was to have film, video, and audio in the dining room area of the kitchen and also through the schools. I understand that it's not really all there. I know this is an expensive thing to think about, but it's also about safety. So if someone in the kitchen takes a fall, you would know if it was their fault or whether there's object in the way that shouldn't have been there. If something happened in the hallways to a child, even in the stairway, you can visibly see this and see what's going on. So we hope maybe we can get this on the budget to get this done because it is very well needed. I have 3 children that has graduated out of CPS, and all 3 of them, my sons have 3 blue collars apiece. So I like CPS all the time, and I thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Tracy Linville, followed by Ashley Garland, followed by LaShonda Barnett.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tracy Linville. I am a 26-year veteran teacher of Cincinnati Public Schools. I've taught all grades pre-K through 3rd. I've also served as a math coach, and I'm currently serving as the K-6 math specialist for John P. Parker School. And I'm here today to speak about concerns my school community and myself have regarding the possibility of decisions that have been made and are currently being made by board committees and ultimately the board as a whole, and how they may conflict with the guardrails that are newly developed. The first 2 guardrails I want to kind of speak to are guardrails 3 and 6, which have to do around communication and community partnerships. The JPP community, LSDMC chair, teachers, parents, as a whole have repeatedly asked for a community engagement meeting to be hosted at John P. Parker Elementary School regarding the Madisonville schools and how Bramble and John P. Parker and Schroeder can all work together. We have yet to have that meeting scheduled, so we're asking for that. Many parents do not understand that whatever happens at Bramble will affect what happens with their students at John P. Parker. So we'd like to see an increase in community engagement around that. We also want to point out that we kind of feel that the perception is that our parents may not be fully engaged. A lot of our parents work, have 2 full-time jobs, and they are not being respected as maybe some of the other four-star schools in our district would be if they asked for such a meeting. So I wanted to point that out. The next guardrail I wanted to talk about was the whole child commitment. And I won't have time for that.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Ashley Garland, followed by Chandra Barnett, followed by Tommy Smith.
Hello, good evening. Ashley Garland, parent and teacher at John P. Parker School. And I would just like to say there seems to be continued confusion as to why John P. Parker is upset with the survey that was mentioned. Parents, teachers, and community members have expressed concerns in regards to how skewed the former Bramble School survey is, and one member of the board at the last ad hoc meeting even expressed that we're just upset because the data didn't go the way we wanted it to. But her opinions couldn't be further from the truth. And our issue with the survey is that it's completely guided and controlled in order for you to gain the results that you want. And in no way does the survey reflect the true opinions of our families, community partners, and staff. Unless someone has taken the survey and knows what the other options are, what options are possible, they most likely won't be selecting other. And they're going to click the options that you provided for them. So to say that you have made no decision yet is fallacious and dishonest. And if that was true, then you could have updated your survey like we requested at the last staff meeting that Mr. Little attended, to include all viable options for our building grade bands, because there are definitely more possible options if you haven't made a decision. For Bramble, that community is not thriving yet. For John P. Parker, this transition is going to be dismantling to our community, and for Schroeder, it's going to be a benefit because they need a space for their 7th to 8th graders. The other issue is that you can take it anonymously. So how are you invalidating multiple or duplicate responses? So yes, we're speaking up when we see inequitable efforts, but today I have nearly 200 petitions signed by almost 100 families, community members, parents, partners, and our students requesting that you keep John P. Parker a pre-K to 6th grade building. I have those hard copies for you. In regards to the social media promotions that I brought to the attention of the board as being inequitable, that still remains true. Who should I give these to? Sure, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have LaShondra Barnett, followed by Tommy Smith, after which we'll have our first online speaker.
Mine won't be as fancy as hers. I believe it would be a great detriment to the children to send them over to Bramble because it would be breaking up a family. Not just a family, their natural family, but their school family as well. These kids from pre-K to 6, we see them every day. We deal with them every day. And some mornings you may have one kid that's off a little bit. He may need a hug from Mr. Shonda. Mr. Shonda won't be able to do that if I'm at Bramble. And it may be another kid that needs something from me. Because like I said, I have personal relationships with these children. And that's one of the parents behind me. I have a personal relationship with her daughter, is what she may need me. And I can't be there if I'm away from the school. And like I said, I believe it'd be a detriment. We have a thriving society at our school. And to dismantle it would be almost like a crime. Because you have parents who can't be at 2 places at once. That school starts at 8, this school starts at 7, and I have to go to work. So where is it the time that I drop 2 kids off at 2 different places and make it to work on time? I won't be able to keep telling my job, well, I gotta be late. Gotta take my kids to work. Take my kids to school. How many times will my job accept that before I don't have a job? And I'm a staff member of CPS, and I will have to make that decision because I have 2 kids in CPS. And if y'all make this type of decision, I'm going to have to tell a boss or something, I got to leave to take my kid to work.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Tammy Smith, excuse me for reading that incorrectly before, followed by our first online speaker.
Hi, my name is Marilyn Ingram. I'm actually a parent, 3 kids that attend John P. Parker Elementary. And Like the other guy, I have social anxiety, but I had to come up here and say something because my kids attend that school. I attended that school over a decade ago, John P. Parker, and I see the growth in it. The school is made for pre-K through 6th grade. That's what it was made for. The building itself, if you go and look around, pre-K through 6. I live on the other side of town, but I decided to keep my kids at John P. Parker because it's such a lovely school, and I see the growth. And I want my kids to be comfortable there. I don't feel comfortable with older kids around my little kids. My daughter has epilepsy. Let's say one of the kids bump her, then she have a seizure, you know, or too much is going on or something with these older kids around. I just feel like Bramble needs to figure out what they got going on over there. Leave John P. Parker alone. They doing their thing. Clap for them, congratulate them. You don't have to be adding stuff on and doing this and that. They doing okay. So I wanted to continue to be like that. Keep it how it is. Bramble staff can come over to John P. Parker and get a job, work there. Why don't you come over to John P. Parker and get a job? You know, it's enough room. Help out. Bramble is not even how many students I got there? A couple students there. It's not that many students even there. So I think we should keep John P. Parker the way it is, and pre-K through 6th grade. Don't add anything additional. Ms. Mack, the principal, has done a lovely job. I was there when she was the principal. I was going to that school, me and my sisters. I don't have time. On the survey, it wasn't even stating like what's really going on. I had to actually hear that from staff, what was really going on. And I said, I have to come and say something.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Did we have a Tammy Smith? We got you earlier, or we're good. Okay. Online speaker, Mr. Hoying.
Yes, Luke Blocher is our first online speaker. Go ahead, Luke. Go ahead, Mr. Blocher.
Luke, can you hear us okay? We're not sure if he can hear us. You want to try our next one, Mr. Hoying, and then we'll come back? Oh, we can't hear you. Luke, we're excited you're here. We're trying to problem solve an audio issue where we can see you fine, but we can't hear you. Yeah, Luke, we think there might be an audio issue on your end where we can see you, but we can't hear you. Can you hear us? He can't hear us either. Okay, let's move on to our next one, Mr. Hoying. Thanks everybody for trying.
And our other online speaker did not accept the invitation, so that's all our online speakers.
All right, so we'll keep moving. Our next speaker is in person, which is the president of the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers, Julie Sellers. For anyone who doesn't regularly join our meetings, the contract between the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers and CPS grants the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers president the right to speak at any meetings. And there is a tradition of that time being both at the end of hearing of the public and without the 2-minute time limit.
Good evening. I just want to speak to you about something that's in the treasurer's report this evening. There was an RFP that was put out to address chronic absenteeism. I'm concerned that you are voting to approve an organization to assist with reducing the chronic absenteeism and to increase attendance within the district. This contract with All Here is to adopt an AI chatbot to automatically text family engagement. And what I would like to know is how will the district guarantee family privacy, and how will AI keep our students and their families' information confidential? I don't think that our kids should be feeding into this information. This program is $110,000, but if you review the 6 companies who responded, I'm really glad that you didn't select Revolutionary Educator out of LA with their RFP was $1.9 billion. I had to count the zeros a couple times. But CFT has been researching how to use best practices to address chronic student attendance. We have at least 11 strategies identified of best practices, and we believe that a text program is not one of those strategies. Remember that addressing chronic student absences is a complex issue and will require a multi-factored approach to make sure students are participating. Collaboration among educators, families, and support services is key to success. Consequences must also be put in place for chronic student absences, but they should also be designed to encourage regular attendance while considering the underlying reasons for the absences. Realistic consequences can vary based on the age of the student, the severity of the issue, the school and the district policies, which are pretty much absent. We have identified 11 potential consequences, and texting with a chat box is not a strategy to improve attendance. It's essential for schools to maintain a balance between offering support and applying consequences. The goal should be to address the root causes of chronic absenteeism, promote a positive learning environment, and encourage students to attend school regularly. Collaboration with parents and social workers and support services is key to addressing the issue effectively. We have not been doing a good job across the district for several years now, and I think it got worse during COVID, but this was a problem prior to COVID, and it's a problem that we must address not just school by school, which is where we have to start, but it should become a whole community approach on having a complete campaign for how are we going to make sure all of our kids are getting to school. I did look up All Here, and it's an A1 chat box that automates family engagement. You can go online, request a demo, but it has frontline support via an automatic AI texting platform. I have concerns. I haven't been able to get information on this, but where does our students' information go once it's entered into the AI world? I think that this is a concern, not just with students, but it's a concern that we're hearing across the country. AI has many positives, but at this point, I don't know what those guardrails will be around this in order to have it happen. I have 11 strategies of support to make sure kids get to school, which we can really work on. And I also have 11 different strategies of consequences that for chronic absenteeism, but they are all even, those consequences are even in the form of support and education to students and their families. So I hope that this evening, it was at the very end of the treasurer's report. If you scroll down to the bottom, it was in the treasurer's report, and I think that we need more information and a presentation on this prior to you all voting to approve this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes our hearing of the public this evening, and we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is item F, approval of minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes for special meeting September 18 and business meeting September 18?
So moved.
Thank you, Vice President Craig. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Any discussion on the approval of the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Do we have any opposed? Minutes are approved. We're going to move next into our committee reports this evening. I will share, we do have 5 of these, so it's a longer list this evening. And I want to make sure we don't skip over anything important. We shouldn't do that. And I want to note that the more efficiently we can move through these, the more effectively we will end our meeting in a reasonable time. Ms. Jones, would you present the Student Achievement Committee of the Whole report for October 8th?
I promise you this is going to be the shortest.
You got it.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to report the Student Achievement Committee of the Whole minutes. The meeting was held October 18, 2023 at 4. The public is invited to look online for the full presentation as well as a recording of the meeting. The committee reviewed, the superintendent reviewed with, hold on. The superintendent reviewed the progress monitoring goals and guardrails. And the first goal was a percentage of third graders proficient in reading. The data is in the report. There was robust conversation about that. I won't go into the specific recommendations or thoughts, but just to inform you that that was the first one reviewed. Goal 2, the current gap in reading proficiency between 6th grade African American, Hispanic, and multiracial students and 6th grade white students on the Ohio State test was reviewed. And goal 3, the percentage first-time Algebra 1 test takers proficient on the Ohio end of course exam was reviewed. So again, a lot of these goals were reviewed. There was robust conversation with all of them. I left out one, sorry. There was the progress of school year 23 6th grade students meeting the success criteria benchmark on the OST math was reviewed. Looks like I didn't do a bunch of them. But anyway, I'm going to make this short. But there were a number of goals presented, and the superintendent at going toward the end of it, and based on the comments that and recommendations of the committee, the full board committee, offered some next steps, and those are listed as well in the report. These were next steps to improve in some of the areas, to reconsider one of the processes, and then begin implementing some of the other supports and opportunities that were presented at that meeting. I submit the report as written and hope for your approval.
Thank you. Ms. Jones, any comments or questions on the committee report? All of us were in that meeting. Hearing none. Great. Mr. Moraski, would you present the Policy and Equity Committee report, please?
I would. Thank you, President Lindy. We had an excellent policy committee, our last meeting. We began with a continued discussion of policy 5330, which was use of medications. We were happy to have Ms. Karen Imbis from CFT there. There have been a lot of questions regarding teachers dispensing medication, and we were happy to say that tonight we have moved forward, revised policy for your approval. So you'll see that later on. I'm not ignorant enough to speak on behalf of other people, but I do feel that when we left that meeting, Ms. Imbis from CFT, our general counsel, and my 2 board colleagues and I all felt really good about the policy as far as protecting teachers and the district. So we're proud of that work, and we look forward to passing that later in this meeting. We then moved on to policy 6152, student fees, fines, and charges. We talked at length about this. It was, I believe, Ms. Weinberg and Ms. Bolton at different times that brought this up this year. Tonight, it will dominate board matters as the only topic. So I'll kind of save a lot of the meat potatoes for then. But the long and short of it is, it was our belief in policy committee that this board may be interested in talking about what it might look like to waive student fees entirely. The treasurer did a lot of great work with her team to propose to us what it might look like to do that. She broke down school by school who collects fees, who doesn't. Some collect different fees, some waive fees, etc. And so it was a good exercise regardless, all reflected in the minutes. But we felt that before we move forward with any kind of affecting the policy, revising, added language, removing language, that the whole board should talk about, you know, are we correct in thinking there might be an appetite to waive student fees across the board in the name of equity, and what might that look like? So we'll discuss that tonight. We discussed safety of students attending after-school activities. This was another item Committee Weinberg had asked us to discuss. I'll give you the high-level sort of report outs. Mr. Horing informed us that entry and exit policy is once in and once out, so you can't come and go. For those who had questions about that. And Derek Little, Chief of Staff, informed the committee that in advance of the school year, athletic security team and CPD meet to review the entire schedule for each event, to confirm assignments and coverage for each event and competition. And so that was kind of the report out there. We felt good about that and then moved on. We may come back to it at another time. But again, Ms. Weinberg wanted to discuss it. We did, and it was, I think, a good conversation for all of us. And then moving toward the end here in other business, we have 2 new proposed policies that we will discuss at our next meeting, which is the last policy committee meeting of the year. We propose, or no, actually, these are the one, never mind, we're moving these forward tonight, aren't we? Proposed new policy 7230, gifts, grants, and bequests, because finance had already talked about it. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. So we will move that and propose tonight that we pass that in 7230.02 crowdsourcing. As that is used more and more, it became apparent maybe a few years too late, if I'm honest with myself, to have a policy regarding crowdsourcing. And then lastly, safety drills came up again. My very first committee meeting, the policy committee that I chaired, which was 4 years ago. This was the dominant topic on that committee, and it came up again. And what came up was, how are they administered, done equitably? Are teachers prepared to answer questions of students, et cetera, et cetera? You can read reflected in the minutes that yes, people are prepared. We have counselors there to work with students who may have a difficult time with this. And Dr. Little went through all of the rules and regulations from the state. We obviously have to do these drills. It's a sad state of affairs that we have to do these drills. We do them in a much, if I may editorialize for a moment, much calmer and rational and sane way than some places that go a little over the top with it, if I may. And so we feel good about that conversation as well. And if anyone has any questions, I know that the superintendent and her team would certainly be happy to answer those. But again, the main items are you'll see on the resolutions tonight and under board matters from your policy committee. I present the minutes as written.
Thank you, Mr. Moraski. Next, we're going to hear from Ms. Bolton on budget, finance, and growth.
Thank you very much. Much of what's in tonight's minutes report we'll be dealing with, so I think this one can be pretty short in anticipation of that. The Finance Committee, as it often does, received a report from the Cincinnati Preschool Promise folks, particularly emphasizing their annual report, and we've included some of the major pages from that annual report. Besides that, the treasurer presented as well something we requested, which was the focus by CPS as preschool enrollment and last dollar in statistical sharing, which is one of the requirements within the master agreement about it being the last dollar in, meaning you've contributed all the other monies available. And so that was shown by the treasurer, and appreciate that. Then we had what we're going to be having tonight. We have sort of a dress rehearsal with the 5-year forecast. Also, as you will recall, framed the question as to how we will approach the FY25, whether or not it would be balanced to the revenue annually. And you all determined that last meeting, but we got that preview, and I think the finance discussion for framing that question was very useful. We also had our now monthly benefits update as a result of a number of the audits that have been conducted over time regarding our benefits efforts. We also had a presentation by a community member from the Clifton Town Meeting folks, because there is an issue regarding a street safety and street redesign. It's a safe and clean grant that is taking part regarding Clifton Avenue, starting around the business district and coming down, but it stops prior to getting to our 2 schools that are on that same street. And whereas maybe the most congestion and some of the greatest issues are, as well as I believe 3 different crossing walks as well. And so we had a request from the presentation, a letter that has gone to board members, and that the request was either to reach out to City Council about this plan or perhaps participate financially in extending the grant so that our space on that street, on Clifton, beautiful Clifton Avenue, would be relevant and hopefully productive for increasing safety for our students and families and the traffic. We also had started to hear some ideas about some policies that the treasurer would like to present and talk about. We also began to talk about other kinds of sources of revenue, again, the certificates of participation, in the anticipation that we are faced with needing facility improvements because of capacity reached in some of our schools, as well as some of the things that we need to be doing in order to grow or change how indeed we enroll students in various buildings and facilities. Finally, we also heard, of course, about the community reinvestment CRAs, and that's listed for you. A lot of good discussion from last year's budget discussion about grants and how we best spend those grants and whether or not those grants are being fully expended by schools and by the district, and whether or not there's enough accountability and frankly enough understanding of the grants and the stipulations that are attached. We also saw the missing KPIs for various, that sounds weird, missing, it's the ones undone, the ones that are not yet done, for the KPIs. And then also, if we could, we talked a bit about district school student fees, as has been mentioned, found out what the real cost might be, and had a great discussion, and we adjourned into executive session to hear from the treasurer. I submit and hope for approval.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Do you want to also tackle, if we haven't already, the audit committee?
I will do so, Mr. Vice President. Thank you. We have for the community, we have a wonderful community audit committee made up of professionals in the field who kind of operate independently of us and give us advice. And so they meet very regularly. And one of the very first things that they demonstrated, and I was happy that Mr. Burkhart brought this to our attention, or followed up on a request by the committee, and that request was to look at vendors and get a list not only of the vendors, but also whether they're local, whether they're not local, when they joined us, when they didn't join us, do they meet our stipulations regarding minority and women-owned and such. So it was a pretty good very beneficial discussion and a great document to share. Appreciate that. We also then began to talk about some of the needs regarding facilities, and Mr. Burkhart shared with us some of the most important and telling maintenance issues, perhaps related in part to how long ago our facilities master plan, which was mentioned here, and when we talked about Governor Gilligan, that we're in a cycle of repair for many of those schools. Also got an update, but we kind of tabled part of this, which is the Council on Great City Schools report regarding the Human Resources and Talent Department, because I think the treasurer was interested in helping the audit committee better understand that report. Then we had updates from our audit committee, and they shared with us particularly something that's going to be very useful for all of us that are interested in doing this, including, I think, in part, the public, and that's a creation of the audit committee is going to create, and there's wonderful folks within that department. We're going to be creating an audit dashboard, which I think will be very, very obviously transparent and accessible to all of us trying to follow just how accountable we all are on a given day or any day, and appreciated it. And then we talked a little bit about what we needed to look to the future, and appreciate and hope that this, as well as the Finance, Budget and Growth Committee's minutes, will be accepted.
Thank you, Chair Bolton. Any questions about the Audit Committee meeting on the 25th? Moving on to our last report, we'll hear from the Ad Hoc Attendance Boundaries Committee Chair, Dr. Moffitt.
Thank you. I'm going to start with the action items because Much of what we've heard has been expressed from the community regarding John P. Parker. And we did hear you, and it is contained inside of the ad hoc minutes that are listed on the board docs. But from our meeting, we have 3 action items, and we do have a meeting coming up this Thursday, where that meeting will be the committee members working on our report that is going to be presented. And we're finding that we may need a little longer than the designated hour that we've been given for the December meeting. So we're going to probably request a little longer time, but we're going to need longer than an hour and more like less than 3 hours for our 18-month review. Our 3 action items, as we discussed during the meeting, we pretty much worked on putting what we've learned from a historical perspective into the report. We've had, it was pretty lengthy already, around 12 pages of a history, and what was left over from the previous ad hoc meeting that was years ago, and some of those still open items regarding policy and regarding things that were still needing to be done. In addition to our charge, and the charge was very similar, that we were to work on attendance boundaries for elementary schools. We looked at the program audit that was conducted last time this year by administration of all of the schools within the district, what schools were actually, what programs were at each school. We also looked at and decided on a corridor model for our district, West, Central, and East. And what does that look like? So our report will be more of a summary of what's inside of each corridor programmatically. And then we discussed and looking at equitable distribution. We've also discussed the possibility of middle schools, not junior highs like we've had before. If you all have been around for a while, you know about the old models that we had middle schools, and then we went to junior high, putting the 7th and 8th graders into the high schools. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about actually either and I think the superintendent said the 6 through 8 model, it's in the report, but also the cost associated with that. That's what we're waiting on, is the cost associated with that with regard to staffing. What does that look like across our district and programmatically? So we do have 3 action items. The committee will continue to work on our report. Again, we do have a meeting coming up. It's a working meeting, so it's not for public comment, but the public is always invited to attend. And that's going to be where we work on our report, in addition with the administration. And then our regularly scheduled meeting. We will work on the date for the presentation. Right now it is set for December the 4th. The other action item is that administration will provide the cost analysis for the recommended middle school option of 6 through 8, which will include staffing, transportation, and facility capacity. We spent a significant amount of time this past 18 months looking at all of our facilities, the capacity, and then the programming involved with that. And our last action item is that administration will share the survey results of the Madisonville, John P. Parker, and Bramble survey distributed to the community in October for review and inclusion in the ad hoc report if necessary. We heard a lot from the community around the survey that we had not actually really dove into at the committee, but there was a request for the survey results of that. So that's pretty much the summation of our report. We did discuss the middle school option around capacity and pricing, and we just don't have a lot of that information, but that is the last piece of information that we're waiting on in order to put that into the report to make some recommendations. So I do submit this and prayerfully pray for acceptance.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moffitt. Any questions on the Ad Hoc Boundaries Committee report this evening? Hearing none, is there a motion to adopt all of our committee reports that are on the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Is there a second? Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. We've had plenty of discussion, but just last call, anything on any of the committee reports? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Great. All 5 committee reports are adopted. So we're going to move now into the presentations section of our meeting this evening. And we'll get into the progress monitoring and the 5-year forecast in a second. But the only thing I wanted to say by way of introduction is to link this to the way we started the meeting with the idea that we're trying to spend a significant share of our board meetings progress monitoring on the goals and guardrails. And what we mean by that is we spent a great deal of time a year ago gathering significant community input and feedback on what student outcomes should matter most and what values most need to be upheld. And what we're doing now is checking to make sure that that's actually happening. So you'll hear that in the next few minutes. That's aligned to the first of those board priorities we mentioned. And what's going to come after that, the 5-year forecast, is very much connected to the second of those board priorities around sharing and reinforcing our FY25 budget context. So with that, we'll turn it over to our superintendent.
Thank you, President Lindy. So we'll just jump right in. I think we know the structure at this point, so we're ready to move in. And I know that this is going to be a really quality conversation, just like our last ones have been. So today our update is focused on Goal 4 and the interim goals, and Guardrail 2 and the interims as well. Right now, our next meeting on the 15th of November, which is our School Improvement Committee of the Whole meeting, is covering Goal 3 interims, Goal 5, and Guardrail 6 and the interim. Next slide. So our Goal 4, jumping right in, the percent of Black, Hispanic, and multiracial students graduating with College Credit Plus credit or workforce credential will increase from 47.6% in June of 2023 to 68% by June of 2027. So that's our overall goal. The percent of Black, Hispanic, and multiracial students graduating with College Credit Plus, that we're renaming the goal here. So as we look at the data from last year, which we're referencing as the 2021-22 school year, we see that we have an increase of a 1.1% change. I also want to call out here, and I know that 18-19 was prior to the pandemic, but just to look collectively how the district has improved in this area, even since the pandemic, I do think is worthwhile calling out across the board. So if we notice in 18-19, we were at 27.6%. And then there's been a steady increase in that area since 18-19, even with the pandemic, and that continued this past year. So this is an area that we do believe we're on target for. As we look closely at the overall goal, there was improvement in each area, while for our Black students, the improvement was only slight. It is relevant that about 50% of our Black students are earning a college credit or a credential. 49% is what it was for this past year. And that is one of our higher areas of the 3. If you notice, that happens to be an area that's higher for our Black students than it happens to be for our white students in terms of this particular area. And our multiracial students are right at about 48%. The other thing is collectively looking at the overall increase for multiracial from the previous school year to last school year was 7% across the board. So we know that the data says that for many students that are multiracial, if multiracial was not an option, many of those students would also identify with being Black students. And so when we think about those areas together, it's a very positive way to look at the data. Next slide. 4A, the percent of 10th grade Black, Hispanic, and multiracial students meeting the success criteria benchmark on OST reading will increase from 35.2% in 2023 to 40% in 2025. And we have seen a slight improvement in this area as well. You know, one of the things that we're reviewing as a part of looking at the interim goals is whether or not the interim goal that we're using is the right interim goal to review as we think about our alignment to the overall goal. But this one, as we thought about the goals, it really was around the proficiency of the students, because as we think about College Credit Plus classes, our students have to pass OST, they have to have a certain GPA, and they have to have a college readiness score. And so in terms of doing that, it limits the denominator for who's eligible as we think about College Credit Plus. Not necessarily the same for our CTE courses, but we also have a CTE pathway at most of our schools, but not all students are going into those. So just to kind of share that across the board. So we do believe that we're on track here. As with the last presentation, at the bottom, Rob, if you'll go to see the school by school data. Included here for the board and the community, the school by school data for the percentage of students that were meeting the criteria for proficient or higher. So this allows you to look at that data in terms of 10th grade reading at the individual school sites for those that would be interested in that particular level of the data. If we'll go back. And if we'll go back one more slide for me to the beginning of 4. Also, here, if you'll click there, I didn't want to leave that out. So anywhere I put the hyperlink, it gives you more data there. If we'll click I'm sorry, Rob, if you go back to the goal 4, the beginning of the goal. One more slide, backwards, right there. If you go down to here, this gives the total for the individual schools. So the percentage of students graduating with CCP or workforce credential, and the number of students, if you'll stop right there, please, the number of students and the number of graduating students. So it lets you see by individual school what the percentages were that made up the overall target for how we are calculating this particular area. Thank you. And then 4B, thank you. And so 4B is on track as well. This specifically calls out our female 10th grade students and ensuring that our 10th grade female students are also on target. And we did have an increase as well from last year, from 2021, 22 to 22, 23 of 0.4% in this particular area. When we look at male, and then female Black, female Hispanic, female white, female multiracial. What we did not put here is if there are any students that identify one way or the other, that is not pulled out in this data. So this data is specifically students that identify as male or female, and then from that, it gives us the overarching information that we're looking at. So we do believe that we're on target in this area as well. Again, an area to look at. If you go down to here as well, this gives you the analysis by school for where the students are based on their individual schools. Next slide. Okay, CCP, 4C. Back one. All right, the percentage of eligible students enrolled in CCP courses, and it's relevant that we say the eligible students because, again, there are additional criteria that go along with students being eligible for a CCP course. And so the goal here, and this is a huge goal for us, the goal is to improve in a 2-year period from 19% to 30%. So it's really going to take some concerted effort in this space as a interim goal for us. So we do believe we're on track. From last year, there was an increase of 6.6 percentage points to get to that space. So if we continue to grow at that rate, it'll get us where we're looking to go by 2025. But again, there has to be some intentionality around that. To call out specifically the increase across the board, an increase of 5.3% for our Black students, 2% for our Hispanic students, 10.7% for our multiracial students. Our general ed students across the board was 7.7%, and for our special education students, an increase of 2.3%. So really focusing on the CCP work. The district has done a really good job of making sure that there are CCP courses available across the district, just like there are AP courses available to all of our students across the district as well. And I won't go into the particular the particular Excel again, but just as with the other slides at the very bottom where you see here, you can click there and see the breakdown specifically by school. Next slide. 4D, and this is our eligible students in CTE courses. So we saw an increase in this area as well. Another space to call out that we have exceeded our pre-pandemic numbers in terms of this particular indicator. In 18-19, there were 41.2% of the students that were eligible that were in CTE courses. And for last year, that was 45.5%. So that was an increase even from 18-19. So we see the dip in 19-20, but there has been improvement and continued focus as we've moved forward. And then last year, more intentional focus in that space. And so there was an improvement as well. And we see the breakdown as we look at our populations of students. We're seeing an increase across the board on our subgroups and their involvement in the courses. So I'll stop here for goal one, goal 4, just to see if we have any questions here before we go to our guardrail.
Questions from board members. Superintendent, we could do this now or not, but I think it might be helpful in terms of questions board members may or may not have to hear the part at the end where you talk about like what this makes you and your team want to go do. We don't have to do that, but I think if people, people should feel welcome to ask questions now, and I think there'll be a piece at the end where the administration shares what they're going to do about this. And if people have additional questions, then that is also okay. So does anyone have a question they'd like to ask right now? Vice President Craig.
I just have one, and it really is stemming around the CTE courses.
Okay, you go back.
And I think, I guess maybe just my question is, and I know we did the CTE audit, or the CTE audit was done, but the results didn't show that the necessarily being enrolled in the course meant that they got credit at the state level. And so I didn't know if there's any measurements that we are thinking about in that result, or any thought process we were thinking about around the idea of whether or not they're enrolled versus whether or not they actually get the benefit of the CTE course.
Right, so I think that as we discussed during the CTE audit, it's a work in progress for 2 reasons. One, our state focuses on the web exam and the students' proficiency on the web exam. There has not been as much of a focus across the board. There are some areas where there is a focus on the credentials. For example, just like we did a couple of weeks ago with Stop the Bleed. That is one of the credentials that our students receive, and it's a requirement that they get a certain number of credentials. 12, I believe, is the number of credentials now, the points that they have to get in order for one of the graduation seals. However, collectively, when we look at some of, as we're talking to industry, when we look at some of the credentials that when you think about CTE, you're thinking you're working on it now, you're getting the credential, and then you're transitioning into industry so you can use the credential. That hasn't been the expectation for the state. It's not required by the state. So in terms of thinking about how we do that work moving forward, working with our team, it's identifying the areas that students can be credentialed in. That's one. But number 2 is also in most of the credentials, in order for the students to be eligible for the credential, the person that's teaching the course, based on the credentialing standards, the person that's teaching the course has to be credentialed in that particular area as well. And because that hasn't been a requirement from the state, it's not that way across the board. So I think our additional areas of focus, as we talk about when we get to the last slide, is really increasing, being really, really clear around what credentials we already have that our students are moving toward, getting those credentials for transitioning into the workforce, not just for meeting the expectation of graduation. And then the second is also beginning to work more around staffing in terms of individuals that are credentialed in certain areas, how we think about those individuals, and how we partner with the broader business community. There's a lot of interest in the business community about our students and their credentials and how we're thinking about credentials. And there's opportunity for additional funding from a lot of those entities in terms of helping our students get credentialed as well.
Good, Vice President Craig. All right, other questions at this point before we keep moving? Dr. Moffitt?
I do have one more question. Slide 6. So how are we, can you tell one more time about how that's being identified? Because I wanted us, what if we have a student who's identifying differently? How are we accounting for that? I thought we were, how are we accounting for students that identify differently than where we're categorizing them?
So for this particular data set, I just wanted to call out that there are students that identify one way or the other. This data is pulled from our student information system based on how students are identified and are coded within the information system.
Any other questions from board members? All right, let's keep moving.
Okay, guardrail 2, the superintendent would not allow discriminatory or culturally insensitive disciplinary treatment that results in disproportionate punishment among students to go unaddressed. And so this is where we begin to talk about all of our discipline data, and you do have access just as the process before at the link at the bottom. When you select that link, you have access to all of the discipline data, as will any individual that accesses this through board docs also. So the first guardrail 2A, the percentage of K-12 Black, Hispanics, and multiracial students with a category 2 infraction compared to white students will decrease from 15.4 points in May of 23 to 12.5 points in May of 2025. And so when we think about how we're looking at the decreases, again, we started this with just some baseline work, thinking about how you're looking at reorganizing systems and working across the board with systems and the systems, the strategies that you put in place for improvement. And one of the things that we talked about in data, and I want to share this again, is as we think about discipline data specifically, this year we're making sure, and we asked the same thing last year, but really encouraging schools to make certain that all of the data is captured. Because when we see a change or an improvement in discipline data, we want to know that it's connected to a change in behavior and not just connected to a change in coding. And so it's really important that we monitor that along the way. So for our quarter 1, and this is just a snapshot of where we are right now. Right now for quarter 1, last year, we're seeing that we've had a 5.5% decline as we think about where we were last year versus where we are right now. And that's important as we're looking at where we're looking moving forward. So if we go into, we have a lot of different data sets that are a part of this particular area. And this is specific to category 2 infractions, and this is comparing our combined students of color to our white students. If we go down school by school discipline data, breakdown by student group, so there are 3 different ones. If we'll hold 1 second, Rob. One is by student group, one is by disciplinary actions, and the other is by exclusionary actions only. So the disciplinary action code is one of the sets of data, and the exclusionary practice or the response to the discipline is the other set of data. So when as we begin, if we go back to the first group, the breakdown by student group, and click here. So as we take a moment to look at the breakdown by student group, this is listed by student group and by school. So we start with the percentage of Black students with a category 2, the percentage of white students with Hispanic students with a category 2, multiracial students with a category 2, and then our white students with a category 2. So the combined numbers on the total on the front slide is taking all of those areas, putting them together, and then comparing them overall to our white students. As we go back to the slide, just to talk through it a little bit, from the first quarter, when we look at the percent, we had 8% of our combined students that had a category 2 infraction. For our Black students specifically, that was 9.5. For our Hispanic students, that was 1.3. For our multiracial students, that was 3.6. So when we combine all of those together, our combined students was 8. Our white students was 2.5, so the 5.5 is the difference between the two, and our goal is to have a difference. When we look at this particular area, the difference of right around 3 points. So looking like we're trending in the right direction. Still too high, honestly, but an area for us to continue to look at and focus on. If we go to the all discipline action as well, the next one. So there was an ask earlier about the school, the infraction, what type of infraction it was, who was getting the infraction. So this data is based on the first quarter. Down the left, we see the individual school, excuse me, in the B column, and I do want to call this out. We did further disaggregate by students that have an IEP versus students that don't have an IEP. So that also allows us to cross-reference that data as well. And then our breakdown for our subgroups also. And then as we move forward, we're looking at the disciplinary summary. So what type of disciplinary practice there was for the issue that occurred. And if we'll go back, and then we can, and if you, I'm sorry, Rob, if you go back one more time, that was the second one? Yes. And then if we scroll all the way to the end of that, it also allows you to see all of the totals at the very end in terms of the summary. So it's giving to you the response to what the infraction was. Let's go to the next. And here is the type of the exclusionary practices that were done as well. So on the first slide, for example, one of the examples that you saw, or one of the columns, a response was to write a reflection, which is very appropriate as we think about restoration, restorative practices, and what's happening in that space. This particular Excel is only talking about those exclusionary practices, and so that means when students are no longer in class. And so that's what these particular infractions are and the summary of those. Okay, let's go to the next. The percent of Black male students with a Category 2 infraction compared to white male students will decrease from 20.4 points in May of 2023 to 13 points in May of 2025. And what we found in digging into this data just a little bit more and trying to prepare the historical data is there was not collectively at the system level historical data that was kept specifically on Black males versus white males. So the actual data is where we're starting in terms of looking at the decrease. And so from the first quarter, we see that there is a difference there of there's an 8-point difference. The overall goal is to try to get to 7 points. So right now we're on the right track in terms of the decline. And you also see the same breakdown information at the links at the bottom. Guardrail next. The percentage of students in 7th through 12th grade. So let me stop before I continue with this one because this goes into teacher-student relationships. So I want to see if there are questions around the disciplinary guardrail first, because that might be where there are some additional questions.
Any questions on the disciplinary piece? Ms. Bolton.
Yes, thank you. Found it, and this is too big a question for tonight, but if you can just and try to kind of thumbnail it, but aware of all that's going on in our community and aware of what's happening sometimes on our campuses or, you know, within our schools. Could you help us understand, help me understand, and maybe the public, the role restorative work has in reducing violence?
Absolutely, and it's really not a difficult question to answer now. So if we go back to, we shared during the opening of school, a opening of school presentation with all staff. And then I also did, after having some conversation with our CFT president as well, did a video that all of the students watched at the school level, the students and the staff. And it talked about expectations and how we're looking at those expectations. One of the things that we talked about as we did our preparation for this school year and thinking about restoration, restorative practices across the board in a lot of different places have gotten a lot of challenges because when people hear restorative practices, they think that means it's devoid of discipline. And the reality is there are some things that happen that require discipline as well. What we're looking at for restorative practices is ways that we can work with our children to help them learn from the mistakes that they've made. Some of those things may still have discipline that goes along with them, but we want them to learn something from what they've done. So there are a lot of different practices that go along with that. A lot of people are familiar with restorative circles, which gives an opportunity for people to work together and talk together and answer questions together. But a part of restoration is also restoring the harm. And so if you victimize someone else, what was the antecedent? What happened when that started, and how are we moving forward with that? I think the area here that's been good for our staff is since the beginning of the school year across our staff, across the district, we've actually trained outside of just restorative practices 101, so to speak. We have trained over 500, actually about 560 of our staff members in restorative practices, because we also focused on those that would kind of be at the very beginning. So we work with our security, our staff in the main office, and then teachers as well around helping students get to understanding what it was that they did wrong. So when we think about what is the role of restoration, one of the main purposes of restorative practices is to offer students a foundation to help think about what they do before they make the decision to do it the next time. To give them strategies to start with that allow them to think through their social emotional expectations, their social emotional responses, character development before they make the wrong choice. So really trying to work with them in a proactive way, even though it may sound like it's a reactive way, making it a foundation of what's happening in the school, teaching rituals and routines, which was not necessarily something that was consistent across our schools, but continuing to do that. And the most important thing I think about the video, from the feedback that I've gotten, from teachers, staff, and even from students, is that we also shared that we have expectations for students, but that ultimately, the teacher is the authority in the classroom. So it is the expectation that our students comply with what they're being asked to do by the teachers in the classroom and the adults that are responsible for supporting them in the school.
And then I have how should I say? I have some interest in what I think they were doing perhaps at Aiken and maybe one other school a couple of years ago, and prior to your arrival, with the diversionary program. Is that still in effect, or is that something that isn't part of restorative practices?
So the diversionary program is restorative in nature, but it's also a reaction to something that's already occurred. Okay. So when we think about diversionary court, for example, that means that students have done something and they have to have a response for whatever that something is. And so instead of those individuals going into the court system, into the juvenile court system, there is an opportunity for them to go through this type of restoration to give them a second chance opportunity. So that is still occurring. It's actually at Aiken and CDA. Is the other location. I say CDA virtual, I use them interchangeably. Sure. But continuing to think through, it is a restorative practice process in nature, just by thinking about, you've made a choice. If there are some other things that you don't have, like if it's a first time type of offense kind of thing, then there are some other things that could happen versus, and if you honor those things, then it doesn't put you in that pipeline, so to speak.
Do we still have that
Yes,
happening?
we do.
Thank you.
Ms. Jones.
Yes, I have a couple questions. One is Category 2 infraction is defined as what?
Yes, so Category 2 infractions are the infractions in the code that generally are not considered classroom management type of infractions. So they're generally not the infractions that are dealt with in the classroom environment when we think about classroom management. So depending on the type of situation or the level of it, students getting into a fight could be a Class 2 offense. So it's the type of offenses as they're coded in the Code of Conduct.
Okay, I'm asking that question because, and I need just clarification around why, it says no prior data available by gender, as 20 and 2021. But I do remember that we used to get disciplinary data. We used to get, and it wasn't very extravagant, but it gave us numbers. And somewhere those numbers were broken out into the aggregate groups. And as well, not only discipline data, but the bullying data and all of that stuff, which may fall in that category 2 infraction. And so I'm curious why that data, when you say it's not available, what does that mean?
All right, that's the same question I asked, and I'm going to answer the question, and then if there is a different response, I'm going to ask Jeremy if he'll be prepared to come and respond as well. So one of the things that's really been important as we have started our work is that we streamline where data is coming from, so that as we're producing the data and reproducing the data, it's coming from one location. I asked the same question because I have seen previous reports. However, it was not something that was captured in our student information system, which is where our disciplinary information goes. Likely it was maneuvered outside of that system, so it's not something that the team that's pulling the data now has access to. So it was a system level issue in terms of who's pulling data where and how that data is pulled. Now we put the system in place at the system level so that moving forward, we can continue to capture that data so that as we're using our PowerSchool system, that's where we keep the data. It's not something that's extracted from there and then someone is merging those things together to then go back and try to make reports that otherwise should be definitely in the system.
Okay, you've helped me to better understand it. I'm still struggling with, so where did previously those numbers, like the disciplinary numbers, where'd they come from? Individual schools?
So they came, so the data, so the disciplinary data piece, it was accurate. What wasn't included in here was whether it was a black male or a white male. It was the ethnicity was not captured in the system. So for individuals that have said, I hear Board Member Moffitt saying that you've had it. I looked at the previous reports. I followed up with our team as well, Jeremy. I don't know if you want to come down and say something that's any different from what I've already shared, because it's not something that we have access to at this point.
I didn't mean to start a riot, but.
No worries. But I said the exact same thing. I mean, the team will share with you and share the information because I know there's been data before. In terms of, the question is about Cognos reports and whether or not it was in Cognos. Cognos comes from our student information system as well.
Yeah, I think you've largely covered it, but from a historical standpoint, a lot of the reports we've seen in the past, exactly as the superintendent described, were from multiple data sources that were taken by various teams and built out and combined. And so going retroactively now to try and recover some of that, we are not able to reconstruct all of the necessary pieces to give you an accurate picture historically now from the data that we have. But we have changed considerably the way we are storing and gathering our data now, so that going forward, we will have that historical view going forward.
Okay. So I think when I'm hearing all that, there are some systemic changes being made so that we can look at the data.
Well, yes, ma'am. One of the things that we do now, and the team will share this with you, is the data that we report comes from our data system. So it's not a matter, of taking an Excel report from this place and an Excel report from this place and merging those things through VLOOKUP or merging them through Access to then give a report. It allows you to go to one location so that when you pull the information, whether you're pulling it now or you're pulling it later, you're able to pull it the same way because it's coming from the people that are responsible for maintaining the data. So our data comes through research and evaluation, which all of the information should be put into our student information system. Even as we transition to a new student information system moving into next school year, that student information system is already built in a way that it would allow us to get those reports and make sure that they're consistent. Unfortunately, we've seen that in a few different spaces. And so that's why as we share data, we're sharing that from one location so that when it's time to repeat the data, we're able to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Thank you, Superintendent. That sounds like an enormous amount of work. Any other questions before we keep moving? Dr. Moffitt.
So I do have a question. I'm a little kind of concerned, like Board Member Jones, in that we have the data, so maybe we didn't have it measured in one one place, but we could go back and actually pull some of the data together. So I would be very interested to see our historical data, and because it did exist, so maybe it just didn't exist the way we're looking at it. But I do have a question. So the guardrail that the board devised, I'm reading, said just the guardrail, allow discriminatory or culturally insensitive disciplinary treatment that results in, can you keep that? Okay, that results in disproportionate punishment among students to go unaddressed. And so my question, because this is guardrail 2B, but my question from last meeting is still a little consistent in that I wasn't looking at, when I was working to develop the guardrail, I wasn't looking at the decrease or the discriminatory treatment of Black males in comparison to white males. I was looking at there being a decrease or non-discriminatory treatment in Black males. So this definition from the administration to make that comparison, while I think it's nice, I'm wondering, does that, because there is no data, does that really fit into drilling it down for that comparison, or can it just be as a little broader where there is data so that we can see some accurate reflection of a timeline? Because if there isn't any data in comparison to white male students, Black male students to white male students, can we make that a little bit broader and still remain within the guardrail that the board devised that doesn't have that much specificity to it?
So we'll go back to the guardrail slide. So here, one of as we look at the guardrails, we then looked at how we would go back in a SMART goal way and support the guardrail, yes or no. If we move forward, go back to 2A. So if we look at 2A, when we're looking at our students overall, we see that there is data there that gives us information in terms of our subgroups. Let's go to the next one. So for this particular slide, essentially our baseline data for that would be last school year, which is where we would look to start. So where we say that there is not data for 2021 or 21-22, that doesn't form our baseline. Our baseline is formed by 22-23. While there may have been reports that have been provided, the team has shared that there is not a way for us to go back and disaggregate that previous data by male or female, by Black male or white male. However, there is a way for us to do that with last year's data, which becomes the baseline that we would be using for the comparison. So for last year, Black males, in terms of the category 2 infractions, had 29.1% of the Black males had a category 2 infraction, as compared to 8.8% of the white males. That was the baseline that we're working from. And as we look at where we are for this quarter, we see two things. We see a reduction for category 2 offenses for our males, for our Black males and our white males. That is only the first quarter, because the data for 22-23 is for the entire school year. But even within that first quarter, we see that there is a reduction of about 8 percentage points in terms of the gap between our Black male students and our white male students. So my recommendation as we think about how we're looking at this is that we utilize the data from the baseline from last year, because that's where we've started doing the work around our goals, and our guardrails was based on last year's data, not on previous year's data.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It doesn't answer my question now. And what I'm wondering though is, because we had data, we actually did have data, and I'm interested in the trend. And when I, as a board member, worked on the guardrail, it was in wanting the trend to go down historically. So I was just wondering, the guardrail 2B, we didn't design that as a board, that was administration. Is it possible to kind of have it be a little bit broader so that we could utilize the trend data? That's what I was.
So what I'm sharing is, unless you have data that is provided to you, I know earlier when I asked about the data that had been provided previously, I was not able to get that data that was re-provided. What the team that is responsible for putting the data together is sharing, we don't have access to the data prior to then in terms of black males versus white males. However, because there was the conversation around the guardrail, trying to answer your question, so if I'm still not getting it, let me know and I'll try it again. Because there was not, because the information for where we're starting and thinking about proportionately, it's a bit of a challenge to hold the administration accountable for data that occurred prior to last school year. So if last school year becomes the baseline for that information, anything that we're doing in terms of work, in terms of strategy, even though it may be interesting to look at that data, when we think about work, strategy, when we think about protocols that we're putting in place, we cannot address data that happened in 2021 or 21-22 when the baseline for this level of work is right now. So if you have the data, if board members, you have the data from 21-22 in the spreadsheets that were provided to you, if you can share that data with the team and there's something that we can do to do any level of disaggregation from there, we can look at that. But the team responsible for doing the reporting of that do not have access so that they can go through and recreate those numbers for 2021 and 21-22. You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions? I hope before we move to the 5-year forecast, we can give folks a little bit of time to talk about what they want to do with all this information, because I think the real value for this process is both understanding what the current reality is, but then also hearing about what some of the plans are to move us from our current reality to the desired future reality. And I know there's some of that that's coming up. Okay, we'll keep going.
Okay, so if we can go to our next guardrail. Oh, I'm sorry, this was the last one. And this one was specifically on relationships, because the thought process behind this particular guardrail was just as we shared earlier when we were talking about the panorama data and we're talking about student belonging, for example. You know, we know that there is something that culturally changes with children when they feel comfortable in an environment, when they feel connected to teachers that they're working with and staff that they're working with. So we opted to do this particular part of it in response to Guardrail 2 around teacher-student relationships. And the goal was to increase from 48% in May of 2023 to 52% in May of 2025. And we started with the actual. There's not prior data here because remember we just started doing the surveys last December. So we wouldn't have information for the previous 2 school years. So our actual for last year was 48% for all of our students. We see that our students are right around the same area when we look at our subgroups for the students overall, which is positive as we think about it. And our special education students are a little bit higher in terms of thinking about where we're starting. So I want to make sure that we also call that out. And then for the fall, for right now, we're showing that there was a slight increase in that area. And again, because of the number of students that we had to take the actual survey, that increase of the 2 percentage points is significant. Anything over 3,500 students would need to be 1 point, and 900 students would be 2 points. So this is an area that is significant and one that we do believe on track in. I do want to ask the team while we're going to the next to just double check and verify that we didn't transpose special ed and general education in terms of the survey responses, because each of the other ones, there was general ed and then special ed. So let's make sure so we can go ahead and address that now. Okay, if we'll go to the final slide. So now what, so what? And so this is, now we have all of this information, we have all of the data, we're focusing on the data and where we are, but what do we do next? And in response to the current progress, the things that we'll continue to improve is our overall action planning around our panorama data. And as we're doing planning around data, the planning is around the actions that go along with the improvement so that we see the improvement, not just around the improvement of the numbers. So really we want to capitalize and focus on the actions that we're doing so that those actions then are turned key into overall improvement of the students' experiences or individuals' experiences. I think our code of conduct implementation is underway. We've done a lot of work to start with school leaders around alignment of the new code, around making sure that we're understanding the new code and how restoration plays a part of that, and that there's alignment from school to school. So we've done more alignment work this school year already with our leaders and specifically our assistant principals of climate and culture as well. And it's been very well received in terms of thinking about that. So our goal ultimately is to get to a point where if there is an infraction at school X, the response to that infraction is a very similar response to the response that you would get at school Y. Continued use of restorative practices in schools, and as we think about getting to the class 2 infractions, when you really begin to dig deeper into some of the levels, some of the class 2 infractions, many of them could be coded as something different. And so really making sure that there's alignment and understanding around what can be dealt with and addressed at a lower level and what can be dealt with and addressed through a form of restoration. In terms of thinking about the academic achievement, we'll continue to call out our focus overall in our Tier 1 instruction. So whether that's thinking about our CCP coursework, whether that's thinking about improvement in OST scores for our 10th grade students, whether that's thinking about how we're offering and looking at what we're expecting in terms of our CTE courses, really making sure that our Tier 1 instruction, the instruction that every student is getting, is grade level instruction and appropriate for the courses that students are in. And again, continuing with the equity alignment and implementation as we think about academics and discipline. So we want to continue to improve in those areas. A few of the things to reconsider is the process used for the Promise Center referrals and tracking that as we think about the new Focus program. So we have a new student information system that will come online next year that offers us opportunity to truly do a different level of disaggregation around data. And so thinking about what that overall process is and how students are getting referred and how quickly they're able to move into the support that they're expected to receive. The second is master scheduling and course scheduling to expand CCP and CTE course offerings. We talked about that a little bit already, but just making sure that as we think through what's offered to students and the availability, that there is equity across the availability that's offered. And credentials and exam preparation strategies for CCP and workforce credentials. And we talked about that a little earlier during Board Member Craig's question, because again, we need our staff to be credentialed so they're able to provide support for our students. And around Panorama, we want to continue to work with our central office as well in action planning on the data so that as we're looking at where we're going next, we're doing that through the same kind of model that we're doing at the school level. And I think that's the last slide, so I'll open up for any other questions there.
Thank you very much. And again, as we go into questions here, I think a good monitoring report is one where we get a good sense of where the current reality is and how close or far away that is from where we want to be by the end of the goals and guardrails period. We get a sense of whether we're seeing growth and improvement or not. And we get a sense of what the administration's analysis is and plan is for making bigger impacts for students. And it's a good thing if it feels like the thinking and strategies in place are such that they'll get us where we want to go over the next several years. And so any comments or questions from board members that haven't come up already on tonight's report? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Superintendent. I spoke too soon.
Yes, you did.
Ms. Bolton.
You threw me a curve when you said haven't mentioned it before, because I have mentioned this, my current preoccupation for some obvious reasons regarding violence. I'm not sure when we were doing all this regarding discipline and restorative practices and certainly wanting to eliminate these discriminatory gaps. Regardless of all of that, this proclivity to violence perpetrated on one another among our young people, and also the violence that we're seeing between the students attacking teachers and other staff and other people. I just don't know if we, nothing's wrong with this, except I would like some of that old data, but I don't know that this is addressing that situation as forcefully as I'd just like us to kind of consider that. I'm just shocked at even, you're very, very open with us, reporting everything that's happening, you know, and incidences, and it's just, it's, and then of course in the news, and of course, a terrible attack on that one teacher who tried to help a student. Just this proclivity to violence, I don't know if, I don't feel comfortable that this is addressing that. And I see why it may not. And maybe long-term it does, but the high percentage of people saying they've got a good relationship with their teacher is not necessarily dealing with those kids that are saying, hey, I don't. So I'm worried about that.
Thank you for the question. It's one of the things that still keeps me up at night. And I think it has since I was a high school principal 15 years ago in a school that was very challenged, that dealt with some of the same community issues that we're seeing right now. There are a few different things that I would say collectively, and I don't know that there is a way for us to, across the board, capture all of those things. Number one, our goal is we think about the things that we can control in the school building. There is a sphere of influence that we have in the building that we don't have outside of the building. So the conversation is a much larger conversation than just those of us that are having it now, or the conversations that I can have with CFT about what's happening with teachers. I think where we began to look at what we could do in terms of practice this year as a start was to try to add a bit more response, if you will, to students that were committing some of the most egregious behaviors in school. And that was through the work that we did through the Code of Conduct around the expectation for attendance in terms of the Promise Center. So there are some different things that have come up in terms of that, but that was one of our opportunities to address that. I think the second that we have really focused on and are continuing to focus on is trying to identify that 5%. So there is an 80-15-5 principle that says most of the students in the school, and if we look at our own data for high schools, it's misskewed when it comes to that. But the research says that the 80-15-5 principle says that most people are going to do what you ask them to do because you ask them to do it, and that includes kids. There are 5% that have greater issues, and so there are other things that have to be done with them. And then there's the 15% in the middle that cause the challenge. And with quality instruction, with good systems, with good supports, with good management, with good relationships, the 15% goes with the 80% to get 95% rowing in the right direction. Where we see misalignment, and it shows up more in our high schools than not, where we see misalignment is in many of our schools, the 15% is going with the 5% even in the school building to cause even greater challenges. And so really moving back to, and it makes some comfortable and it makes others uncomfortable, but really looking at what are the structures in the school building that there is an expectation for safety, there's an expectation for discipline, that you know where students are, that there's monitoring happening in the hallways, that if kids are in the hallways, there's someone making sure that those things are not happening, and they're monitoring all of these different places that students could be. And I will tell you from experience, we have enough individuals in our buildings to do that. It's retraining them, and some of that has already started, and I see a difference now than I did this time last year. We see something different even with our security individuals that are in buildings. We see teachers that are willing to stand at their doors and watch students as they're moving about from class to class. The greater issue that we have is what's happening in the community that we don't have control over. And so we begin to think about what we can control. For example, and it's not, it's for another conversation, but as we've been doing deeper work with high schools around the things that happen after school is out, as we've been doing some of that work, one of the things that the high schools are telling us, and we're seeing it in the data, is students have too long after school to get on the bus to go home. Because what happens is, while we said, and I know that there was some conversation around not giving students the time to leave at all, leave it open for them, letting them ride the bus at any time. When we're going into specific school issues that have happened and we are disaggregating the data, what we're finding is that students are at school, staff are clearing areas, students are leaving to go somewhere else, and they're coming back to school, which in many instances, the buses are very close to school, and that's where challenges are happening. So one of the next recommendations that we'll have is around those schools, especially where those things are happening, reducing some of that time. So I think that there's a lot of conversation that we can have there. There's been a lot of increase in the checking of students as they're coming into buildings. We have the increased work around, cameras and camera systems and what's happening with that. But the societal issues that we're dealing with across the board, that is going to take a conversation with all of us talking about it and what's actually occurring as a part of that. So while we may not be able to address that as a part of the overall guardrail, hopefully we can get to the point that our schools are insulated enough that we're beginning to see the improvement in what's happening in the school building. How we fix it, collectively, I think if any of us knew how to truly fix those societal issues, we'd be talking to a lot of people and making a lot of money and working through it. Everything that we're doing right now is the best practice work that you would do to change those kind of situations and outcomes.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Any other last questions on our progress monitoring report? On the one hand, this is an incredibly important topic, and I want to make sure it gets full coverage. On the other hand, I do want to acknowledge we have a couple other things to get through this evening. Ms. Jones.
I don't have anything. I hear very clearly what the superintendent is saying, and I agree with that. I think it's very important, though, to Ms. Bolton's point that this really is a bigger, broader issue, and I think it's incumbent on us to do our part, which is what I hear you're saying. I also am hopeful that we can engage with the community differently in a collaborative way to be able to, whatever it takes, education or whatever. So I do think it's a topic for another time when we can fully discuss it, or maybe in committee or something. But yeah, after a while, it fills you up to get all those, the information about what's happening in the community, which we have very little control over. So I just wanted to reiterate kind of what Ms. Bolton is saying about that.
I agree.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Vice President Craig.
I just wanted to share one thought, again, building off of what both Board Member Bolton and Board Member Jones have said, is that I think one of the areas that I heard a lot about last couple of years is consistency and how our schools treat and respond to behavior issues within the school. And I think that is one aspect of this that will attach to some of the things that Board Member Bolton was talking about there with regard to, we have some schools that respond very sternly to things. We have some schools that respond not so sternly to things. And one of the struggles that I have heard from some of our community partners even is how they communicate to the school when an issue happens doesn't get the same response from every school.
Right.
Now that may also be a reflection of some of the needs of each individual student and stuff, but it also still should have some standard of the response from the school should be different, right? Or should be in some level of consistency in how they respond. And I think about that also from some of our partners who will be working with students in other aspects and trying to work with the students to give them opportunity they otherwise would not have. Do we lose some of that desire to be there if you feel like I raise this concern and the principal, the teacher, whoever is working with you hasn't given a full response? The other thing I think about, though, also attaching to that is the thing I heard from a bunch of students was the restorative justice part. That a lot of them wanted to be able to have some of those conversations with their classmates and be able to build up those relationships again. And I would hope in some ways where the outside influences may have a negative, if their peers are part of that process of fixing and healing and helping, that may provide a counterbalance to some of the challenges that we don't have control over. Because I think that was one of the things I did hear from some students, and we heard it from them at board meetings as well when they came in, is that they wanted the opportunity to be able to work with each other to help each other out and hold each other somewhat accountable in ways that sometimes is a little bit difficult to do as a school or as a principal or as an entity.
And so I know that our president is really, I know we need to move on, but this is such an important topic. And I and I'm glad that it came up now in terms of us talking about this particular guardrail, because the other part of that is also true, is that, you know, you have principals that run school buildings, and some of the, you know, requests that principals receive for dealing with some of the things outside of the school day is not one that becomes reasonable. I mean, we get calls for things on weekend. I get the emails as well. And so having the conversation with the larger community is necessary, but it's also how do we truly get the involvement, and this is something that I know Board Member Morosky has referenced in terms of thinking about policy, but how do we get and how do we do any level of expectation or requirement? Because there is a line, right? There is one end of the pendulum is you don't want to do anything that's going to cause students to be in the school to prison pipeline that people talk about. So that's one. The second is there are some things that are breaking the law, and so we don't have a lot of space in between. So how do we continue to engage with families and caregivers where the situations are the most egregious? And I am the first to say it is not all students. It is not all students. If we disaggregate the data around the actual number of students, it's not all students. What do we do about the students that it's not? And how do we make sure that we're providing them with those resources, those skills, those opportunities, that we're celebrating the positive things that are happening with them? And likewise, when we have students that are getting to improvement, how are we also recognizing them and working with them and working with their families? So open to a greater conversation about it. We will do everything that we can humanly possibly do in this space because it is paramount to the overall success of our school district and our students.
Thank you, Superintendent. With that, we'll transition from our progress monitoring report to very different, but very important topic, which is the financial health of our school district in the long run. And we're going to hear an update on our 5-year forecast.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Kevin Ashley. He's the Director of Financial Transparency and Reporting. Also, just for the board, the actual approval of the 5-year forecast is part of the Treasurer's report. The forecast and the notes are in the Treasurer's report for this evening.
I'm sorry, but I didn't hear the last part.
Thank you, Mr. Guston. Ms. Jones, you're saying you couldn't hear?
I couldn't hear the last part.
Sorry. I was just saying that the actual approval of the 5-year forecast in the minutes is included in.
Thank you very much.
Good
Thank
evening. So I'm sure Rob can pull up the PowerPoint. Just a couple of things by way of brief introduction about the forecast. That's not included in the slides, but just kind of a recap. It is required by the Ohio Revised Code. It's required to be done twice a year. It has to be filed by the end of November and the end of May. The format is standardized and required by the now Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. It has 3 years of actual data, so 21, 22, and 23. And then it will have 5 years of projected, which is our current year, 24, since we haven't completed that, 25, 26, 27, and 28. It does only focus on the general fund. So things that occur, if it has any effect on the general fund, it'll be reflected. But if, for instance, transfers for cover debt payments, that kind of thing, will be reflected. But if the money was received in a grant fund and spent out of a grant fund, that will not be reflected on the forecast. So going with the slides, just some considerations we wanted to highlight that affect the forecast and are part of our considerations, but are really not necessarily known at this point. The legislature has proposed a House Bill 187 that would modify procedures used to value real property. And I believe that's passed through the House, is in debate in the Senate. But one of the things that would do is change the way counties complete their reappraisals. And currently they use 1 year of sales data, which causes the rates or the values to go quite a bit higher. So the legislature's considered this proposal that would use a 3-year average versus the 1. So again, stay tuned. We're hoping that won't affect
our collections in the first half of next year, so the February settlement. But that is a consideration. Another thing is the Fair School Funding Plan. As you know, it was envisioned as a 6-year plan that was phased in. We're going into year 3 of that. The legislature has continued those phase-ins, and so those are built into the forecast. Another thing, just to point out, the forecast period touches 3 state biennial budgets, so it's hard enough to project the current budget. So just to kind of, we're in year 24, so we're in the first year of this current biennial budget, but then by the end of this period, we will be in our 3rd one. We include inflationary rates, which obviously are in flux, and so we just try to build that in. Another key thing that has been talked about is, controlling spending within the general fund, and through your discussions at the last board meeting regarding your commitments to maintaining those levels. So we've incorporated that here as well. Pandemic spending, the return of the cliff, is all things that we've talked about in the past as well, and continue to affect the forecast. Student enrollment projections versus actual enrollment. Total enrollments affect our funding, as well as the categorical breakdowns with special education, English language learners, etc. And then obviously collective bargaining agreements, and those negotiations will have an impact on the period as well. The next slide is just a high-level summary of the key elements within the forecast. I want to point out, so for FY24, what is currently forecast is the $595 million for revenues, keeping in mind that includes fund advances that are necessary to keep our grant funds in the positive at the end of June. And then the expenditures are 611.8 plus the 12 million, so 623. So as we've talked about this year in supporting strategic initiatives, et cetera, our expenditure levels are budgeted above our revenue levels. What we've done going forward the next 4 years is to hold down those expenditure levels to be in line with what our projected revenues are. And I know there'll be a lot of decisions to be made about how that will be achieved. But with the commitment that we're able to submit this forecast as such. The yellow highlights at the bottom indicate what the fund balance would be at the end of each of those years. Those are the lines that the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce will look for in terms of their analysis of the financial strength of the district. For instance, if in that year 3 that was a negative, they would then require some sort of action plan related to how the district is going to address that. Another thing is the renewal levies. So that line 11020 is showing annually the $48 million levy that's related to preschool. It's estimated here, so it shows a half-year collection in FY27 and then a full-year collection in FY28. Next slide. This is just a calculation that represents the state foundation calculation of base cost. It is not our actual cost. It is kind of a statewide estimate, average of what that would be, but it does try to apply it to our district. So the state per pupil state share is $3,466, which is 42%. And the local share is $4,631, which is basically 52%. So basically 52 or 57% of the district's general fund funding comes from our local taxpayers and business owners as well. Next slide just kind of gives you some actual data related to district educated enrollment. If you recall, a couple years ago, there was a change that we had ADM, average daily membership, which included students who lived in the district, not necessarily educated by the district. So what this is trying to do is show how that trend has been. Our actuals last year were actually down. We did see enrollment dip last year. And we're trying to project that out, anticipating a return to growth by 25. Next slide. This is just a graph to kind of give you a high level view of, again, this is just showing of this. So the local taxes is 57% of that total revenue. And that's broken down into real estate property tax and public utility property tax. The state funding pieces is the formula piece, the 131 million. Restricted funding, which is basically the DPIA. I'll talk about those a little bit in a minute. And then the state share of local taxes is historically what we've called the homestead and rollback that comes from the state. The all other category includes tax increment financing, community reinvestment area amounts, Medicaid reimbursements, and E-rate. Next slide kind of gives you the slope of revenue projections. The light blue at the end there again represents the renewal pieces that would occur during this period. Next slide. Taxes and property tax rollback. Again, just to kind of give you a high-level view of how those are projected. Again, for taxes, you have to add the two blue together in 27-28 to see how that tax amount will continue. Next slide is state aid, state foundation. The one thing that, again, since this does show 3 years of history, 21 is when we were getting that pass-through funding that then went on to charter schools, Ed Choice, et cetera. That is, so when you take 21 out, you can see more of a normal projection. The restricted grants and aid, as I mentioned, includes the base cost calculations related to student wellness, disadvantaged pupil impact aid, English language learners, gifted, and career tech education. Next slide. This is all other revenue. I think I mentioned before this format is prescribed by the state. And so this is a category that really captures a lot of things for Cincinnati, since we do have those tax increment financing, CRAs, Medicaid reimbursement, et cetera. I think we've kind of explained the one category, bless you, the one category that changes is the advances in, which was the green, and is again a wash in and out to cover those grant funds at the end of the year. Next slide. This is a graphic that shows projected expenditures. And so for the general fund, as you can see, 71% of those expenses do relate to projected personnel costs, salaries and benefits. 124 million relates to purchase services. So this is for the current year, for FY24. So about 20% is purchase services. And then the remaining 9% are all the other items, debt transfers, advances, transfers out for capital improvement, that kind of thing. Next slide. And this is the graph, again, based on these assumptions. If we were to hold the fund balance flat for those out years, you would see where it would be. Now, traditionally, when we forecasted, we've anticipated a higher level of expenditure. So this graph would look a lot different if that was our approach. But just wanted to point that out. And as Mike mentioned, then those will be included in the treasurer's report. You have a hard copy of the forecast as well. But I'll gladly answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for the presentation. I understand, Ms. Bolton, the Finance Committee got a chance to review all of this your last meeting.
Yes, we did.
So this is, some folks are, I know everyone received this by email last week ahead of time, and some folks have also had a chance to ask questions about it. Are there other questions that board members would like to ask this evening? I'd mostly like to express just gratitude, and I know that I'm not sure if Ms. Wagner is still listening or not. I hope she's resting. I understand she's under the weather. Either way, I appreciate the way that both the superintendent at our work session in October and also at a recent board meeting from the treasurer around the approach they should take with a 5-year forecast. I think there's been a lot of board involvement, both through committee and through the full board. But the other board members have any questions they'd like to ask this evening? Ms. Bolton.
Yeah, again, good work, Ashley and company. We've had this conversation, so we don't need to belabor it, that we've determined to have the balanced annual budget, so to speak, regarding revenue and expenditures. But I think looking at this and knowing how the treasurer feels about the cash flow, so to speak, and cash reserve, and since we're really looking at really a 5-year forecast where there would be at least a renewal for perhaps for preschool promise, and obviously sensing what the administration's brought to us regarding buildings and just simple maintenance and replacement of roofs and HVAC and what have you. It's obvious that sooner or later, probably sooner more than later, we're going to be going to the public. But looking at this, what you've produced and what we're looking at is beyond even all that. And I've said this in a public session, we can't cut enough in order to reach this 5-year forecast in a safe and sustainable way. So I know that the board, the treasurer, and the community who's benefited from all the talk and whatever knows that we might, have to consolidate buildings or schools. We might have to divest ourselves of some property that we may or may not need in the short term, long term. We have to perhaps spend a lot of time making sure that we have the full uses of grants at the district and school level. Everything we have to do, we can't afford $50 million for transportation. It's simple. We have to figure something else out. So I look forward to all these big things that are going to be coming, and I think everybody better fasten their seatbelt about what we need to be talking about in order to be sustainable and more independent. If you're going to have worry about the state for 3 biennial budgets within our 5-year forecast, we already are in enemy territory. As simple as that. So I appreciate this 5-year forecast, and I just hope that the board and the community and everybody understands that we need to really, our best thing to do is to think as big as we can. As big as we can. And this is a great opportunity to reshape what we do. And I appreciate the work. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Any other comments or questions from board members before we keep moving? Kevin, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Mr. Guston, Mike, anything from your office that you want to add on, or superintendent, or otherwise we'll keep moving?
Just recognize Kevin's work and a lot of effort into this. A lot of other people on our team as well. So
thank you to Mr. Ashley and to your entire team. Thank you very much. So we'll keep moving. This evening we are now on, we're finished with item H. We're on the second page here on item I. We have done the first resolution. We have 3 others. Mr. Morosky, would you like to present resolution 2?
I would, President Lindy, thank you. This is the resolution I referred to in the presentation of the policy minutes. It's a resolution amending board policy 5330, use of medications. I present the resolution as written.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Any discussion on the second resolution? Hearing none. Mr. Guston, would you call the vote, please?
yes. Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffitt? Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. Ms. Bolton, would you like to introduce the third resolution?
Thank you. A resolution amending Board Policy 6233, amenities for participants at meeting and/or other occasions. This is the food policy for our discussions and who's allowed to serve water and who can eat candy and at whose cost, basically, which says no one.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton, for the thorough overview. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Any discussion on item 3? Mr. Guston, would you call the vote?
Yes. Ms. Bolton?
It's a travesty, but yes.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffat? Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. Moving on to section J, Superintendent of Schools. Mrs. Weinberg, do we have any retirements this evening?
I think we have one more resolution.
Just kidding.
Then
Let's
I will
try
read.
resolution 4, also from Ms. Weinberg.
All right, so we have a resolution approving students eligible for subsidy reimbursement in lieu of transportation for the 2023-24 school year, and I submit this resolution as written.
Thank you very much, and I apologize for skipping that resolution. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Any discussion on resolution 4? Mr. Guston, would you call the vote, please?
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffat? Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes, we'll try it again with section J. Ms. Weinberg, are there any retirements this evening?
President Lindy, we do not have any retirements today.
No retirements. All right. Is there a motion to accept the recommendations of the superintendent this evening?
So moved.
Thank you, Vice President Craig. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Any discussion on the recommendations of the superintendent? Hearing none. Mr. Guston, would you call the vote, please?
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffat? Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. Is there a motion to adopt the report of the treasurer this evening?
So move.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Moffat. Any discussion on the report of the treasurer? And just as a reminder, as Mr. Guston shared earlier, the 5-year forecast is included as part of the treasurer's report this evening. Mrs. Weinberg.
I am trying to find it, and I don't know what slide it's on, but I just had a couple of questions for the superintendent regarding the RFP for the $110,000 for whatever the company was called.
Sure.
Here.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So the company is actually called All Here. There was an RFP that was done for it by the requirements for RFP. This is a product that we're looking to use for grant funding. Just like with all of the programs that we use, all of the information is encrypted. And so for all of the programs that we use, it goes through an encryption process in terms of communication. For this particular, the way I believe that this one actually won the award, it is launched from a research base, a huge research base around students and access for parents, and parents being made aware immediately that students are out of school. And the research for this was launched at Harvard. And so that was the initial work for it. Very large school districts across the country right now are using this. One of them happens to be Los Angeles. Unified School District is one that is using the product and has found some success with it. We could give a list of what the others are. I think the reality is there are a lot of different programs that are using some kind of AI responsiveness. The way that we protect our students in everything that we're doing is by encrypting the information that comes in. And so there is not immediate access. It is also just a notice through text message, and parents can also opt out for that. But knowing the kind of challenges that we have in terms of attendance, it became one more thing to help provide support for our families and knowledge and recognition that students are out of school.
So this would be used with what grades? All students?
It will
All
be.
grades?
So it becomes notice for families as one of the resources for notice for families.
And I'm just curious, besides this, what would be the other solution in terms of trying to change or improve attendance?
Yeah, I think those are the things.
If you could remind me, because I know
Sure.
we've talked about it
No
before.
worries, no worries. I think those are the things that we've already talked about. So we talked about them as we looked at goals and guardrails the last time. So one of them is making certain that parents are educated around attendance. This is not just about chronic absenteeism. This is attendance across the board. So if students are out of school, if they're absent, we provide the information for how families are notified through a text message process. The second thing is making sure that there's communication with families, especially with older families when students are absent from school. We talked during our last CAL meeting, I believe it was, around the way that chronic absenteeism is calculated in our state, and it's done by the hour. It's not by the day or not by the half day. So making sure that families also know if children come in late or if they're leaving early, that there is additional, that counts against them in terms of chronic absenteeism. We also discussed the importance of making sure that the data that we're capturing on students is also accurate, so that if students come in based on what's happening at the school site, there should be an update if a child is not there at the beginning of class. Whenever they come in, the state requires that we document what time they came into school, that because it's based on the hourly rate for that. So that's the second. The third, that's the third. The fourth is the attendance intervention meetings that we would have with our school-based support. So we know that in our high schools, we have additional social workers that are providing attendance support for our high schools right now. And I don't think I shared this one on the slide, but we've completed about 600 home visits since the beginning of the school year. Now we're able to document those. We weren't documenting them previously, but home visits to families for students that are not in attendance. So it's really an additional layer of the support that we're already doing. And of course, I'd be interested in those other 11 strategies that our president discussed as well, because I'm sure that there are strategies that we're looking at across the board.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Other questions or discussion on the Treasurer's report this evening? Ms. Bolton.
Yeah, to follow up on that, does this, I have concerns about this. I'm not sure. Isn't the role in part for our social workers, as you mentioned, in each of our buildings to have some, I mean, they take the point on this, right? I mean, will they have access to this documentation or this kind of technology?
So they'll have access to the reporting that comes from it so that we can do the necessary follow-up that would come from reporting. This actually goes through our student information system. As I shared, it's encrypted, so it's not direct to families. It usually, from an encryption process, it's not the student's actual student information. It becomes, when they do the encryption process, they take that data and then set that data up so that it knows who to send the information to. But it will be based on what's put in the student information system. So it will be based on, teachers taking attendance.
Oh, okay. I want to get to that point. So what we talked about last time, the issue was the teachers have to stop and start or whatever. So supposedly teachers would have some sort of more immediate access to enter this information?
So this is response for families. So teachers are still responsible, and school-based staff are still
Right.
responsible for taking students' attendance. And so we would have to continue to look at how we offer additional support for teachers that are doing that after students, after students come in, when students come into class late. We're doing a focus group around that as well in terms of thinking about what might be a way to make that more manageable. This is actually the response to it after the fact. So when you look at the research that's around it, there's a lot of research that supports notice to families, how quickly notices to families go, how you're able to identify whether it was correct or it was an error. And so this offers an additional way to augment that work, so that we're getting to the correct information and also making sure that our families, they have some level of immediacy around what's really occurring with the students.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Any other discussion on the Treasurer's report? I see Mrs. Weinberg. We'll do folks who haven't gone yet. Dr. Moffitt, and then if folks have others, we can come back.
So I just had a question, because President Sellers brought that up. I was very curious about, is that coming from ESSER or the general fund?
It's actually coming from grant funds.
Grant funds, okay. And then, but it's for all of our schools.
Yes.
Right. And then, my only question about it, and then President Sellers had some of the questions, she verbalized some of the questions that I had. My thinking was, what is our return rate for robocalls that come back? Because this is only going to be as effective as the information that is provided. And I think you touched on that a little bit, but we do have a large transition of phone numbers for parents. The bus company, when I was able to go out with them, they shared the exact same thing, that some of the numbers don't work. They work at the beginning of the year. They don't work at the middle of the year. So in order for this to be effective, we have to put in good information. So what is the assurance that we are shoring up the information that we're putting in order to benefit from the return and have a high return on this investment?
So right now, our response rate for our robocalls is right around 80 to 85% on a pretty consistent basis in terms of how we are, the numbers and the numbers being working numbers. What we do have is that there is still a training opportunity, if you will, with families, because once you select, and we do a lot of robocalls. So we're looking for, some other opportunities outside of just robocalls, because one of the things that happens is once you opt out from robocalls, it opts you out of all of the robocalls. So once that happens, then you have to go through a process to get reconnected in terms of the robo. So I think it just becomes one of the areas that we continue to focus on around data integrity and how we're putting that information into the system and how we're doing the response rate. We also find that we get even better response rates on emails as well. And so emails and texts, even though the phone numbers are generally the same in terms of the text messages or not, we do get pretty good response rate on that as well.
Okay, I'm just about the wording of it. It said that we reserve the right for a 3 one-year terms, not 3 years. So, but this is a grant from the superintendent's office?
This is actually an overall grant from Impact Aid.
Okay, it just says department, office
Yes.
of superintendent, so that's why I was asking.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And all of our, most of our contracts have that clause in there, but we are able to, with the right notification, not continue. So it's not a continuous contract at this point.
I think we had talked about that for another contract, and so that was just my question about the wording of that, and then the return on the investment.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Any other questions from folks who've not asked anything about the treasurer's report? Hearing none. Mrs. Weinberg.
Just one quick comment. I know that I'm checking out the website, allhere.com, and there was a question or there was a concern about safety, not safety, but security breach of the data. And so I just wanted to say that for anyone who is interested, you can just visit the website, and it kind of tells you how they are keeping the privacy and the security of the students, teacher, and family data.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Weinberg. Any other last questions on the treasurer's report? Mr. Guston, would you call the vote, please?
Certainly. Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffitt? Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. All right. So just in our last couple of items here, we have an important topic under board matters from Mr. Morosky.
Thank you, President Lindy. And so just to kind of set the stage, and I believe Mr. Guston has some numbers that he can help me with as well, just to help paint the picture. So to read you just some verbatim lines from our discussion in policy. So policy 6152 is student fees, fines, and charges. And 6152.01 is waiver of fees. So we began the conversation, Ms. Wagner updated our committee that she had met with a few principals to get their feedback on the potential idea of waiving student fees just sort of across the board. And the biggest concern from the schools was not to eliminate all fees, specifically around advanced placement exams. Ms. Wagner stated that schools can add on different fees for different things, as well as informing them student activity fees are not being eliminated. One of the things that was found, if you scroll down in the meeting minutes, was that not every school is charging the same. Some schools are getting more returned than other schools, and that if the student fees were wiped entirely, that would cost us about $1 million. So right off the heels of the 5-year forecast, not, the most exciting thing to start talking about, but certainly, again, the committee thought in the name of equity this was worth talking about. And that the district managed student activity fund was $2.4 million, which is something a little different. As we found out, there are some third-party contractors that set up some of our student activities. So they're getting the money, and there's all these moving kind of parts. So I don't know, Mr. Guston, if there's any more clarity that you could provide. The bottom line is it would cost a lot of money to do it, in the millions, if we wanted to waive them across the board. And Ms. Bolton, Ms. Weinberg, and myself kind of wanted to get everybody's feedback if that was something this board actually had an appetite to do. But I want to see if Mr. Guston has anything to add.
Yeah, if I may, I think, the initial conversation was about base student fees.
Right.
Right, and so the district charges a base fee for each student. A large amount of those are waived. So any student who's eligible for free and reduced lunch has those fees waived. The district, we get about $400,000 a year in revenue from that. And as you mentioned, it is very different between schools, right? So some schools bring in quite a bit of money, some schools bring in very little. Treasurer Wagner did do kind of an analysis of a couple different options. So, and I think this is what you're referring to. So if we waive the base fees and just gave all schools the full rate of what we would have charged, that would cost roughly $1 million. She also did a discounted rate. So she kind of cut the discounted rate. There are waivers or partial waivers. That's about $650,000 a year. And then she did a couple flat rate analysis. So if you just said every school gets an extra $15 per student, that's about $500,000. And so those are just a couple other options.
Thank you. Yeah.
So if I could also add, we actually started this conversation as a follow-up to the conversation the board had around the fee discussion last year, and at the end of the school year. And one of the things that we looked at in terms of the cross-reference before it actually came back to the board to ask us some information was the different things that fees were being paid for. And so our initial recommendation to start with was to, or one of the things that we wanted to propose was to remove the standard fee, as Mr. Guston is referencing, from all of the schools. What we find, however, is, to your point earlier, and I think that we provided the breakdown of the other fees that are being charged by schools. There are a lot of fees, whether it's fees for field trips, whether it's fees for other opportunities that they're doing in schools, whether it's some kind of lab expense. There are fees that schools are charging, and we did do a cross-reference in terms of breakdown for what each school is charging fees for. The state fees that are part of what we're talking about right now, to Mr. Guston's point, many of our schools do waive those fees. Where we see that there, at least in the elementary schools, where we see that there has not been as much of the waiving process is for other items that are also considered fee-based, i.e. A student destroyed something, and so there is the need to replace that. That's considered an actual fee as well. So I just, as the board is making the recommendation or the determination about where we go next, there are some of the schools, and I would really encourage to look at what those schools are in terms of that collection process. And their ability to really be involved in that process, because the $1 million is kind of where we start. There are a lot of other areas that schools are also doing right now that really take us up to right around the area of about $5 million. So we really want to make sure that we're cross-referencing. The initial recommendation was around the actual state fees, and many schools do waive them.
Thank you, Superintendent. So yeah, the committee just wanted to open it up and get people's feedback on where the appetite was regarding this issue.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Thank you, Superintendent. And thank you also, Mr. Guston. Comments from board members? Dr. Moffitt.
So I want to also share that Treasurer Wagner gave us kind of a little overview of this in budget and policy, and she shared, and you can certainly clarify, that the fees are applied for 1 year, but if they're not collected for multiple years, they get paid to the school that finally collected them. So correct me. So, and this has happened to me, so I'll definitely admit it. But if you don't pay your fee in 6th grade, but then the student in the 9th grade, or let's just say the student goes to graduate, then there's a huge balance. Those fees can be waived from the schools that they participated in, but the schools, when they're paid, the school that they finally attended gets those fees. So that could be an equity issue. When she brought that up, that was kind of something that I thought about. And then also, I'm curious around us having a conversation about schools with different programming, because Montessori's, my kids went to Montessori schools, and there's different fees there, in addition to the self-reported state fees that we're talking about. That are we talking about waiving those fees, or are we talking about just waiving the fees that you self-report up to $35 and then it gets categorized or it's tiered down? So I think we need to have a very deep conversation. I haven't said whether I'm one way or the other, but there are levels to the conversation. And it could very well get into an equity issue if we want to really have it fairly. So I just want us to be very clear on what Jen shared. She said that those are some of that it is self-reporting. We don't know if you really don't make this much money, or if you do make this much money. We're taking your word for that. And then also, if they don't get paid, it rolls over. And while we may waive some fees, that's still a cost issue for some of our families as well. And then if they do pay it at senior year, it goes to that school to get the money, not the schools that they attended all those years that was applicable. So just wanted to offer that Treasurer Wagner shared.
Other board members. Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Ms. Bolden.
Yeah, very quickly, obviously, we're not going to try to do all this tonight, and we need a tremendous amount of information, and I think we've got a good start. I have a radical position on it. I believe we shouldn't charge any fees except for lost or stolen equipment or what have you. And I think if you put together our general fund and our grants and whatever, we have nearly $1 billion budget. And from that budget, which is in a difficult straits right now, it seems to me that the stress on families and also the inequity of it, $5 million or whatever for fees, is still doable as we phase in, maybe not in 1 year, but in a couple of years, because I still don't think it's right in public school to have anybody pay to play or have a child not be able to go on a field trip and hope that each school will waive what they need to waive, let alone the collection of it, the keeping of it, and the hardship that it caused. So I just think we have an opportunity to have a great discussion about it over the next few months or whatever. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden. Ms. Jones.
I'm happy that Ms. Bolden went first on that, because I have some mixed feelings, and I think those mixed feelings come with not knowing and being unclear. So I'm writing down notes, and it's like, I heard superintendent reference something about removing standard fees. I don't know what the standard fees are. And then what happens if a student destroyed something, a computer? Well, I happen to believe that if a student takes a computer home and it's damaged, one time you give them the benefit of the doubt, but if they take home a second computer and it's damaged, they should pay for it. To me, it teaches responsibility. And I know for a fact that at some schools, the students can't take their computers home because there's concern that they get damaged when they go home. Well, to me, that's an equity issue. So I am looking forward to having more conversation, and I need the information as well. I'm more apt to look at some waiver. I don't believe that all fees should be waived. We got to teach our students how to be responsible adults, and one way is to accept your financial obligations as well. But I also want to know what makes practical sense, so I would need more information.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Any other last comments for the policy chair, Vice President Craig?
I think one thing that I would also want to add on to it, and I think we had a slight discussion of this at the Budget and Finance I was able to stand for, but is this idea of also making sure that we have a way of managing who knows what those fees are. Because I think that's the other bigger problem at the schools is that we might have very valid reasons why we have fees for people, but until someone comes over and says, "What's my fee?" There's no one in Central that will be able to say, "Here's what this person's fee is at this given time." And again, I know this is not something that for the majority of our students, but we do have a number of students, to Dr. Moffitt's point, who have some mobility throughout the district. And if your fees go from one school to another, like who is that person that would track what that fee is at any given time and what that fee might be for, if you lose a book at one school, does it cost one thing versus you lose a book at another school? And so some of those types of things, I think that may be helpful for us to understand as we are thinking about what are the fees that we would waive, what are the fees, and what are the cost implications for that. It also may change behavior in some ways if people are more informed of, and if we're more able to track and do real-time updates to parents to say, your child has this fee for this reason that they may not be always aware of. Many of us graduated many years ago, but I think back then also we always had the problem of people getting to the end of the year and not realizing they had a fee for something that they probably should have known, probably should have been aware of, but nobody discussed it until it was time to figure out whether or not you got your grades, you got your report card, or you got your degree, or you got to walk, or those type of things. And so I think it is valid for us to do it for a lot of the fees, but again, to maybe Ms. Bolton's point and Ms. Jones' point, that there may be some fees that we would keep on. It would be good to be able to categorize them and maybe distinguish what that cost would be. Because I think the cost that Treasurer Wagner gave was for all fees as opposed to specific types.
Thank you very much, Vice President Craig. Superintendent.
So we can provide the information to the board. We do have it broken down based on what you're referring to. To answer the question for Board Member Jones, as I'm talking about standard fees, there's a standard state fee, $26 for elementary, $31 for 7th and 8th grade, and $35 for high school students. So that is the fee that's in the guidance that can be waived depending on certain scenarios, certain hardships. But those are when I'm talking about standard fees, that's what I'm talking about. As the board is looking to make the ultimate decision, my only request is once we've started this conversation, graduation seems like it's a long time away, but it's really not. And so as we begin to think about it, if we're looking at doing something that is going to impact this year, we would need to have an opportunity to get that information out to families, to address students that maybe have already paid for this year. And so it really, if it's something that we're looking to change now, it's something that we would need some direction on. But initially, our initial proposal that we were going to offer to the board was just around, at least for this year, those state-specific fees, the 26, the 31, and the 35, to just get started. But if we're looking at doing something different, just being able to give us direction so that we can move into implementation.
Thank you, Superintendent. I'll just share, I think, for my part, before we turn it back to Mr. Morosky, I have a high level of confidence in this committee and its leadership, and I look forward to your recommendation. Mr. Morosky, anything else that you want to share?
No, thanks, President Lindy and Superintendent. That sounds great to me. I'm only one person. And I think, Ms. Bolton hit the nail on the head, so I won't bother to repeat it all. But this was intended just to start this. This is obviously not something we wanted to wrap up today at all. All the questions that have been asked here, we have asked in our committee, which is why we wanted to bring it here. But it seems like, everyone's at least interested in having the discussion, which was kind of our thinking. So appreciate the time, and we'll keep it on our radar. And thank you, Superintendent, for the recommendation, which again, I think sounds great.
Thank you very much. Okay, so as we round out our meeting this evening, do we have any inquiries or updates tonight? Vice President Craig.
So I want to give two quick updates. One, because our board bylaws say I should. I went to the Council on Great City Schools conference. I want to first, though Treasurer Wagner's not here, I just want to give her, and I'll do it as kind of a kudos and update also, but she did a phenomenal job presenting on our financial town halls. She literally had people walking up to her throughout the conference just going, just ask Jen, which is a little awkward because then they would walk away, and so it was kind of a little weird. But but I think it was a tremendous thing that she did that presentation. I also thought there were a lot of really good discussions about the role absenteeism is playing and the potential safety concerns that are attached to some of the absenteeism. We had some of the members of areas in schools like New Orleans and some of these other areas where they were saying, realistically, they just are struggling to even get people to get their kids to school because they're just worried about how they will get there and those concerns. So I think it's something that all of us across the country are dealing with. The other update that I wanted to make sure I highlight out of the conference also is just that there is a lot of energy around the concerns with regards to some of the federal legislation that will be coming out or that potentially could be coming out. There is hope, I think, probably a good way of saying it, but there's still a lot of concern that our current legislature, and at that time they had just now elected a speaker, won't be apt to funding things on time. And so I think that's something else that we have to be paying attention to, is whether or not things that we get through federal funding will get either addressed appropriately or in a timely manner, or that there may be some potential halts, especially if there is a stoppage in government funding for at the end of November. So that was the two that I wanted to share the update on from the conference.
Thank you very much, Vice President Craig, and thank you for following our bylaws. Any other inquiries or updates this evening? Mr. Moraski.
So it's kind of a inquiry slash reminder. I don't know if there is an answer. If there's not, that's okay. But in the theme of renaming schools, the Lighthouse School, I know we brought it up a number of times. The inquiry is, have we started that engagement? If we haven't, that's fine, because I feel like we keep moving on from things. And so just, I guess I can make it an assignment, if the work hasn't begun, that we need to get out into the community, start getting feedback. I would imagine from the Madisonville community about potential names for Lighthouse. So as a reminder, the agreement we had with them is that we would change the name eventually, like a year or so ago, and nobody at Lighthouse is upset about this at all. But I think, it's the will of their board that they would like to move on from having their name on a school that's not related to them.
Thank you, Mr. Moraski. Any follow-up questions or concerns?
So there has not been any action yet from administration around next steps for this. We heard about it in another meeting that we had, but at that time we were also talking about the process for Bramble, and it was recommended that we waited to go back through policy. So if now it's time, it's just a matter of the board sharing that with us in terms of assignment, and then we can follow up to make sure that the previous historical process for this is followed.
And any concerns from any board members about asking the administration to start that process? Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Moraski. Ms. Bolton, are you raising a hand?
I thought the process was that it would go back, I thought the superintendent just said it would go back to policy.
That's what was shared with me before, but I'm just
So
trying to make sure that that's
think-
what's happening right now.
I think that makes sense. I think too that the Lighthouse School, and also, as we've said a couple of times, obviously part of the issue is for the future is the Promise Center as well, and rethinking that. And I as a former county official, remember very much so Dr. Odell Owens, when he was the coroner. I was always impressed with his effort to address issues for young people that were faced with challenges as well as misbehavior and the dangers of some of the life choices that they were making. So I think it'd be great to go back to policy, but one of the things I'd be very interested in is thinking about creating a wonderful school where we face these challenges and have our kids and have it be named for somebody so positive. It's just one nomination out of the sky.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Superintendent?
So just so that we have clarity. So at this point, is this an assignment that we're moving forward to get started, or is this something that's going back to policy for policy to do something with?
Mr. Moravsky?
I was fine with moving forward, but I'm fine with it coming back to policy too, if that's what the will of my committee is. That's fine with me. I don't.
Yeah, so I think Ms. Bolton, do you want to just clarify what you were saying a second ago?
I think I was listening to what the superintendent said, which was send it back to policy before I spoke. So I think policy is probably the place where it ends up. It might as well start there.
That's fine with me, yeah.
That works with you, Mr.
Yeah, we can put it on
Moravsky?
November, yeah.
Okay, and then that clarifies I see Ms. Jones too, but that clarifies your question?
I think so.
So you're good.
I think the one question that I have though is, are we going back to policy to define process and then come back to administration for us to move forward? Or are we going back to policy for something different? I just thought that was the process because that was shared earlier.
Yeah, Mr. Moravsky, go ahead.
I would look to Ms. Bolton to answer that, if that's okay. Because I'm fine with it coming back to policy. I was also fine with moving forward with it, so.
Yeah, I
whatever we got to do in
I'm
policy, I'm all about
myself.
it.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms.
I'm
Bolton.
fine with it.
We send it back to policy to figure out the process for
There you go.
sure.
If you had
and that
called
we're
on me,
doing-
I would have said that.
We will always go to Ms. Jones. I mean, we just did this with Gilligan tonight, right? So I think, can we follow the same?
2 years, so.
We'll move faster this time.
Got it.
Everybody is good. Excellent. Are there any other non-lighthouse naming related inquiries or updates? I have a couple, but Ms. Bolton, good.
Just an update for those of us that will be at OSBA, the lawsuit that we're involved with regarding Vouchers Hurt Ohio. There will be a rather extensive presentation at OSBA featuring the steering committee and the folks that are leading the way. So I'll be sure to get you the time and place if you're interested in that. That would be very, very helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Ms. Jones?
I just wanted to add I'm also attending the OSBA conference, and I am the delegate assigned from our district. And it should go relatively smooth because there is only one resolution to be looked at, and it comes from our neighboring district of Norwood. So last year took us hours to get. It took like 6 hours, seriously. So this year should be fairly easy. But and what I can do is make sure that everybody knows what that resolution is. And then if you have any feedback, so I'll make sure to send it, to have our staff send it to you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Any others before I'll go yes, Ms. Superintendent.
I just have one just to share. We have it on the screen, but November 1st was National Authors Day, and we have on our website what we recognize about 20 of our own authors that are in our school district. If you go to the actual article that is on the site, you will, and I think it's on the next slide. Yes, this is a cover of all of their books that's actually on the website as well. So for anyone listening, or I would share with anyone else, we know that there are other authors that might be in our school district, so we would just ask that they make contact so that we can also recognize them in this space as well. But did want to do a shout out for our young authors.
Thank you, Superintendent. I'll offer just a quick update, and then I'm going to throw in a kudo here. The update is these meetings with the CPS representatives and the CPP, the Preschool Promise representatives, has continued. We talked about this is the first business meeting we've had since that group had its most recent meeting, which was last week. And I think it was a good meeting. I think it was a productive meeting. Hopefully everyone received and has taken the Doodle scheduling poll for the joint CPP-CPS board meeting, which should take place the week of the 4th of December. And it is our intention for there to be a proposed master agreement at that meeting for us to look at and potentially vote upon. There are a couple of issues that are emerging as important, and we need real meaningful time to talk about those before that meeting on the 4th. I am hoping that we will be able to carve out some of our time during the meeting, the Cal meeting on the 15th, to have that conversation. I want to make sure we are also able to give full time to the other important things we have to talk about during that Cal meeting. But I got to be totally honest, I just don't see another path to do it and get this piece moved to completion by the end of the calendar year. So thanks everybody for the scheduling poll. Look for a more in-depth conversation on this topic coming up at our very next meeting. And I just want to let you know that that's moving forward. My brief kudo is I wanted to say congratulations to the Withrow football team. I understand they advanced to its first regional semifinal ever, which is fabulous. You can hear the Withrow football games and the marching band from my house anytime there is a Withrow football game. And I'm just excited for them and for the students and the coaches. Any other assignments or kudos this evening? Ms. Bolton.
I have an assignment that I'd like to make if it pleases the board. I know we're getting ready to launch into actual contract negotiations that pertain to language, master contracts language. I would like to assign to the administration, if it pleases the board, for the administration to brief the board and board members about the different types of negotiation strategies or types of negotiations that are available to us. I know that some decisions are already being discussed as to what kind of negotiations to have, with interest-based or you know, traditional or whatever. And I think the board especially needs to be briefed as to what kind of negotiations there are, especially faced with the kinds of changes that the district may have to go through looking at the near future. So just a presentation, brief presentation, memo, whatever, so that the board can have some idea as to what to recommend or talk about.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. From the administration, any questions about what the board members requesting?
I think I'm clear on the question. I would ask for just a little bit of time to respond to that, because we've just started our joint training that we're doing together with the administration and our union leads in talking about some of those. And so if we can have just a little bit of time to do that.
Yes, of course. I don't know what we are getting trained on. I mean, I've trained on multiple kinds of.
Correct.
So yeah, as long as no decisions are being made as to some mutual choice as to what kind of negotiations to have, that usually at least has been somewhat a part of a board. We have little role to play after that, but the kind of negotiations, I think the board would like to.
We can pull so you're just asking for a list of the different types of negotiations
And an
there are?
explanation
So we can pull
would
that.
be good.
Yeah, we can share that.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Any concerns about that assignment, first of all? Hearing none. Any other assignments or kudos? Okay, I believe, am I missing anything? I think that is the end of our agenda. Happy election eve, everyone. And having no other business before us, I declare our meeting adjourned.